The wilderness of 1853 Kentucky was no place for a woman alone, especially not one 7 months with a child. But that's exactly where Eleanor Pritchard found herself after the wagon train leader declared her a burden and forced her out. With nothing but a small bundle of possessions and the child growing within her, Eleanor faced certain death in the vast wilderness until fate brought her face to face with Maka, a Shawnee hunter who saw not an enemy, but a soul in need. What happened next would challenge everything both of them believed about the divide between their worlds. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The early morning fog clung to the valley like a shroud, obscuring the distant mountains and muffling the sounds of the awakening forest. Eleanor Pritchard sat alone on a fallen log, her hands resting on her swollen belly, her gaze fixed on the trail of dust and wheel marks that stretched back toward the horizon. The only evidence that the Westbrook wagon train had ever been there. At all. Just yesterday she had been among them, 23 wagons strong, bound for the fertile valleys of Oregon Territory. Just yesterday, she had been Eleanor Pritchard, widow of Thomas Pritchard, a woman of quiet strength who had decided to continue west after burying her husband 3 weeks earlier when fever had taken him. And just yesterday, wagon master Silas Blackwell had declared her presence a risk to the entire expedition. "A woman in your condition slows us down," he had announced before the entire company as the evening campfire cast long shadows across his weather-beaten face. "Winter comes early in the mountains. We've already lost 4 days to that broken axle. We can't afford to move at the pace you set." Eleanor had stood tall despite the ache in her lower back, despite the murmurs that rippled through the gathered. "Settlers. I've pulled my weight, Mr. Blackwell. My husband paid our passage in full before his passing." Blackwell had spat into the dirt. "Your husband ain't here now, is he? And neither is the extra pair of hands he brought. All I see is another mouth to feed and a burden that'll see us all frozen in the passes when the first snow comes." The Millers had spoken up for her, Martha Miller with her kind eyes and her husband Josiah with his booming voice that carried authority even to Blackwell's ears. But the wagon master would not be moved. "The vote's been taken," he had declared as the last light faded from the sky. "At first light, Mrs. Pritchard stays behind. Those who want to risk their lives for her are welcome to do so." No one had. Now, as the sun crested the eastern ridge, Eleanor watched the last wagon disappear over the distant hill. She had been given provisions for 3 days, a small mercy that would only postpone the inevitable. The nearest settlement was over 100 miles back the way they had come. Impossible on foot. Impossible in her condition. Eleanor pressed her hand against the small of her back and slowly rose to her feet. The baby kicked, a strong, insistent movement that brought tears to her eyes. "I know, little one," she whispered. "I haven't given up yet. Your pa always said I was too stubborn for my own good." The meager supplies Blackwell had allowed her were packed in a small bundle: a blanket, a water skin, some dried beef and hardtack, a small knife that had belonged to Thomas. Not nearly enough to survive the wilderness, but Eleanor had no choice but to try. She followed a small game trail that ran alongside a creek, reasoning that water would be her most immediate need. The summer heat was already intense, and her swollen ankles protested with each careful step. By midday, she had covered perhaps 3 miles, a pitiful distance compared to what the wagon train would achieve. Eleanor found a small clearing beside the creek, sheltered by a stand of oak trees. She sank down onto a patch of soft grass, allowing herself to rest before attempting to gather wood for a small fire. The strain of the morning's exertion had left her light-headed, and she knew she needed to be cautious, not just for herself, but for the child. She dozed, fitfully, images of Thomas drifting through her dreams. They had been married just over a year before setting out from their small Pennsylvania town. The promise of land in Oregon had captured his imagination. 300 acres to farm, to build upon, to raise a family. "Just think of it, Ellie," he had said, his eyes bright with excitement. "Our children will grow up with room to run, with mountains to climb. They'll be strong and free." Now Thomas was buried in an unmarked grave somewhere back along the trail, and his child might never draw its first breath. A sudden snap of a twig jolted Eleanor awake. The shadows had lengthened while she slept, and the air had grown cooler. She reached for the knife tucked in her boot, her heart hammering against her ribs. The figure that emerged from the trees was tall and moved with a silent grace that spoke of a lifetime navigating the wilderness. Eleanor's grip tightened on the knife as she struggled to her feet, backing toward the creek. He was clearly Shawnee, his long black hair pulled back with a leather cord, his buckskin clothing adorned with intricate beadwork. A bow was slung across his back, and a hunting knife hung at his waist. But it was his eyes that captured Eleanor's attention, dark and penetrating, yet not unkind. For a long moment they regarded each other in silence. "I mean no harm," Eleanor finally said, though she knew it was unlikely he understood English. She held her hands out, palms forward, the universal sign of peace. The man tilted his head slightly, studying her with undisguised curiosity. His gaze dropped to her swollen belly, then back to her face. "Why a woman alone?" he asked, his English halting but clear. Relief flooded through Eleanor at the realization he could understand her. "My husband died," she explained slowly. "The wagon train left me behind," his brow furrowed. "Left with a child?" There was an edge to his voice that sounded like disbelief. "Yes." Eleanor's vision blurred with unshed tears. "They said I slowed them down, that I was a burden." The man's expression darkened. "White man's ways," he muttered, then shook his head slightly. He tapped his chest. "Mahka." "Mahka," Eleanor repeated carefully. "I'm Eleanor Pritchard. Eleanor." He tested the name, then nodded once, decisively. "Not safe here. Come." He gestured toward the west. Eleanor hesitated. Every story she had ever heard warned against trusting natives, painted them as savages eager to claim white scalps. But the wagon train had abandoned her to certain death, while this stranger was offering help. What choice did she truly have? "My things," she said, gesturing to her small bundle. Mahka nodded and waited patiently as she gathered her few possessions. When she straightened, he held out his hand to carry her bundle. After a moment's hesitation, Eleanor handed it over. He slung it effortlessly across his shoulder, then pointed to a barely visible path that wound through the trees. "Follow," he said simply, and began to walk at a pace that was slow enough for her to maintain. They traveled in silence as the sun began its descent toward the western mountains. Mahka moved with quiet confidence, occasionally pausing to allow Eleanor to rest. Once he disappeared briefly into the underbrush, returning with a handful of berries that he offered to her. They were sweet, bursting with flavor against her tongue, and Eleanor realized how hungry she had become. As twilight descended, Mahka led her to a small clearing where a crude lean-to had been constructed against a rocky outcropping. A fire, pit-lined with stones, sat in the center of the clearing, still containing the ashes from a previous fire. "Rest," Mahka said, gesturing to the lean-to. "I make fire." Eleanor sank gratefully onto the pile of furs that lined the shelter, watching as Mahka efficiently gathered wood and kindled a small fire. The baby shifted restlessly within her, and she placed a soothing hand on her belly. "How far along?" Mahka asked unexpectedly, nodding toward her stomach as he fed small branches to the growing flames. 7 months, I think," Eleanor replied. "My husband and I were hoping to reach Oregon before the birth," Mahka nodded thoughtfully. "Winter comes soon, not a good time for travel." The wagon master said the same. That's why. Her voice faltered. So they leave a woman and child to... D. The contempt in Marka's voice was unmistakable. This not an honor. No, Eleanor agreed softly. It's not. Marka disappeared again, returning with a rabbit he had apparently caught earlier in the day. With practiced efficiency, he skinned and cleaned the animal, then set it to roast over the fire on a spit made from a green branch. The smell of cooking meat made Eleanor's mouth water. As they ate in silence, Eleanor studied her unexpected savior. His features were strong, high cheekbones, a straight nose, a firm jaw softened somewhat by full lips. A thin scar ran along his right cheekbone, the only mar on his otherwise smooth copper skin. He might have been 30, or perhaps a few years older. "Why help me?" she finally asked. "Your people and mine, they're not friends." Marka was quiet for so long that Eleanor thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and measured. "Many winters ago, my wife carry child. Summer is very hot like now. She go to the river for water. Snake bite." His eyes grew distant with the memory. "No one help. She and the child die." He met Eleanor's gaze directly. "I not let mother and child die if I can help." The simple declaration hung in the air between them, a bridge across the vast cultural divide that separated them. "I'm sorry about your wife," Eleanor said softly. Marka nodded once in acknowledgement, then rose to his feet. "Sleep now. Tomorrow, I will go to my village." "Your village?" Alarm coursed through Eleanor. Will I be welcome?" "My people do not like whites," Marka admitted. "But respect life, respect the mother with the child." He gestured to the lean-to. "You're safe here tonight. I watch." Exhaustion pulled at Eleanor's limbs, and the pile of furs looked invitingly soft. She eased herself down, using her bundle as a pillow, and pulled one of the furs over her body. The baby kicked again, a reassuring flutter against her hand. "Thank you, Marka," she murmured. From his position by the fire, Marka inclined his head slightly. "Sleep, Eleanor." Despite her fears, despite the uncertainty of what the morning would bring, Eleanor slept deeply for the first time since Thomas had fallen ill. She woke to the sound of birdsong and the smell of something cooking. Morning sunlight filtered through the trees, casting dappled patterns across the clearing. Marka knelt by the rekindled fire where a small clay pot simmered with what appeared to be some kind of porridge. "You awake," he observed, as Eleanor emerged from the lean-to, wincing slightly at the stiffness in her back. "Eat, then we go." The porridge was made from ground corn and dried berries, simple but nourishing. As Eleanor ate, Marka explained that his village was half a day's journey away, nestled in a hidden valley where the Shawnee had retreated after being pushed from their traditional hunting grounds. "My people once live all through these lands," he said, gesturing broadly. "Now only small places left. White man take more each season." "I'm sorry," Eleanor said, and meant it. She had never given much thought to the displacement of the native peoples. It had simply been a fact of life, something that happened as America expanded westward. Now, seeing the sorrow and resignation in Marka's eyes, she felt a pang of shame for her indifference. "You not take my land," Marka said with a small shrug. "Not your fault, but wasn't it in a way? Wasn't she part of the great migration that pushed the native peoples from their ancestral homes?" Eleanor had no answer to give, so she finished her porridge in silence. They set out as the morning mist still clung to the valleys. Marka led the way, occasionally pointing out edible plants or explaining the uses of certain herbs they passed. Eleanor was surprised by his willingness to share such knowledge, and more surprised still by her own interest. In Pennsylvania, she had kept a small herb garden, and she recognized some of the plants Marka identified, though he often used them in ways she had never considered. "This heal wounds," he said, showing her a plant with delicate white flowers. "Crush leaves. Put on cut, stop bleeding, keep bad spirits out. Eleanor smiled at the mention of spirits, but nodded respectfully. Who was she to discount his beliefs? Perhaps there was wisdom in the Shawnee ways that white medicine had yet to discover. By midday, the terrain had grown more rugged. They followed, a narrow path that wound through a dense forest of oak and hickory, climbing steadily toward a ridge that loomed ahead. The exertion was becoming difficult for Eleanor, and she found herself pausing more frequently to catch her breath. During one such rest, perched on a fallen log while Maka waited patiently, Eleanor felt a sharp pain lance through her abdomen. She gasped, doubling over slightly. Maka was at her side instantly, concern etched on his features. "Baby comes?" "No," Eleanor managed through gritted teeth as the pain subsided. "It's too early. Just a cramp, I think." Maka frowned, clearly unconvinced. "We stop. Rest longer." "I can continue," Eleanor insisted, not wanting to appear weak or ungrateful. "We're close, aren't we?" "Close enough," Maka agreed reluctantly. "But the mountain path is steep, not good for a mother with a child." Before Eleanor could protest, Maka had disappeared into the underbrush. He returned moments later with a sturdy branch that he quickly fashioned into a walking stick, smoothing away the smaller twigs with his knife and testing its strength before presenting it to her. "This help," he said simply. Eleanor accepted the staff gratefully, using it to lever herself to her feet. "Thank you," they continued at an even slower pace, with Maka now staying close to Eleanor's side, ready to steady her if needed. The path grew steeper, winding through rocky outcroppings and stands of pine trees that released their sharp, clean scent into the warm air. As they crested the ridge, Eleanor stopped in wonder. Below them stretched a hidden valley, nestled between, protecting mountains like a secret garden. A clear stream wound through its center, and along its banks she could make out the shapes of about 24 conical structures, wigwams, she recalled they were called, made from bent saplings covered with bark or animal hides. "I mean no harm," Eleanor finally said. Though she knew it was unlikely he understood English, she held her hands out, palms forward, the universal sign of peace. The man tilted his head slightly, studying her with undisguised curiosity. His gaze dropped to her swollen belly, then back to her face. "Why a woman alone?" he asked, his English halting but clear. Relief flooded through Eleanor at the realization he could understand her. "My husband died," she explained slowly. "The wagon train left me behind," his brow furrowed. "Left with a child." There was an edge to his voice that sounded like disbelief. "Yes." Eleanor's vision blurred with unshed tears. "They said I slowed them down, that I was a burden." The man's expression darkened. "White man's ways," he muttered, then shook his head slightly. He tapped his chest. "Maka." "Maka," Eleanor repeated carefully. "I'm Eleanor, Eleanor Pritchard, Eleanor." He tested the name, then nodded once, decisively. "Not safe here, come." He gestured toward the west. Eleanor hesitated. Every story she had ever heard warned against trusting natives, painted them as savages eager to claim white scalps. But the wagon train had abandoned her to certain death, while this stranger was offering help. What choice did she truly have? "My things," she said, gesturing to her small bundle. Maka nodded and waited patiently as she gathered her few possessions. When she straightened, he held out his hand to carry her bundle. After a moment's hesitation, Eleanor handed it over. He slung it effortlessly across his shoulder, then pointed to a barely visible path that wound through the trees. "Follow," he said simply, and began to walk at a pace that was slow enough for her to maintain. They traveled in silence as the sun began its descent toward the western mountains. Maka moved with quiet confidence, occasionally pausing to allow Eleanor to rest. Once He disappeared briefly into the underbrush, returning with a handful of berries that he offered to her. They were sweet, bursting with flavor against her tongue, and Eleanor realized how hungry she had become. As twilight descended, Mahka led her to a small clearing where a crude lean-to had been constructed against a rocky outcropping. A fire, pit-lined with stones, sat in the center of the clearing, still containing the ashes from a previous fire. "Rest," Mahka said, gesturing to the lean-to. "I make fire." Eleanor sank gratefully onto the pile of furs that lined the shelter, watching, as Mahka efficiently gathered wood and kindled a small fire. The baby shifted restlessly within her, and she placed a soothing hand on her belly. "How far along?" Mahka asked unexpectedly, nodding toward her stomach as he fed small branches to the growing flames. 7 months, I think," Eleanor replied. "My husband and I were hoping to reach Oregon before the birth." Mahka nodded thoughtfully. "Winter comes soon, not a good time for travel." The wagon master said the same. "That's why," her voice faltered. "So they leave a woman and child to D." The contempt in Mahka's voice was unmistakable. "This not an honor?" "No," Eleanor agreed softly. "It's not." Mahka disappeared again, returning with a rabbit he had apparently caught earlier in the day. With practiced efficiency, he skinned and cleaned the animal, then set it to roast over the fire on a spit made from a green branch. The smell of cooking meat made Eleanor's mouth water. As they ate in silence, Eleanor studied her unexpected savior. His features were strong, high cheekbones, a straight nose, a firm jaw softened somewhat by full lips. A thin scar ran along his right cheekbone, the only mar on his otherwise smooth copper skin. He might have been 30 or perhaps a few years older. "Why help me?" she finally asked. "Your people and mine, they're not friends." Mahka was quiet for so long that Eleanor thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and measured. "Many winters ago my wife carried child. Summer is very hot like now. She go to the river for water. Snake bite." His eyes grew distant with the memory. "No one help. She and the child die." He met Eleanor's gaze directly. "I not let mother and child die if I can help." The simple declaration hung in the air between them, a bridge across the vast cultural divide that separated them. "I'm sorry about your wife," Eleanor said softly. Mahka nodded once in acknowledgement, then rose to his feet. "Sleep now. Tomorrow I will go to my village." "Your village?" Alarm coursed through Eleanor. Will I be welcome?" "My people do not like whites," Mahka admitted. "But respect life. Respect the mother with the child." He gestured to the lean-to. "You're safe here tonight. I watch." Exhaustion pulled at Eleanor's limbs, and the pile of furs looked invitingly soft. She eased herself down, using her bundle as a pillow, and pulled one of the furs over her body. The baby kicked again, a reassuring flutter against her hand. "Thank you, Mahka," she murmured. From his position by the fire, Mahka inclined his head slightly. "Sleep, Eleanor." Despite her fears, despite the uncertainty of what the morning would bring, Eleanor slept deeply for the first time since Thomas had fallen ill. She woke to the sound of birdsong and the smell of something cooking. Morning sunlight filtered through the trees, casting dappled patterns across the clearing. Mahka knelt by the rekindled fire, where a small clay pot simmered with what appeared to be some kind of porridge. "You awake," he observed, as Eleanor emerged from the lean-to, wincing slightly at the stiffness in her back. "Eat, then we go." The porridge was made from ground corn and dried berries, simple but nourishing. As Eleanor ate, Mahka explained that his village was half a day's journey away, nestled in a hidden valley where the Shawnee had retreated after being pushed from their traditional hunting grounds. "My people once lived all through these lands," he said, gesturing broadly. "Now only small places left. White man take more each season." "I'm sorry," Eleanor said, and meant it. She had never given much thought to the displacement of the native peoples. It had simply been a fact of life, something that happened as America expanded westward. Now, seeing the sorrow and resignation in Maka's eyes, she felt a pang of shame for her indifference. "You not take my land," Maka said with a small shrug. "Not your fault, but wasn't it in a way? Wasn't she part of the great migration that pushed the native peoples from their ancestral homes?" Eleanor had no answer to give, so she finished her porridge in silence. They set out as the morning mist still clung to the valleys. Maka led the way, occasionally pointing out edible plants or explaining the uses of certain herbs they passed. Eleanor was surprised by his willingness to share such knowledge, and more surprised still by her own interest. In Pennsylvania, she had kept a small herb garden, and she recognized some of the plants Maka identified, though he often used them in ways she had never considered. "This heal wounds," he said, showing her a plant with delicate white flowers. "Crush leaves. Put on cut. Stop bleeding. Keep bad spirits out." Eleanor smiled at the mention of spirits, but nodded respectfully. Who was she to discount his beliefs? Perhaps there was wisdom in the Shawnee ways that white medicine had yet to discover. By midday, the terrain had grown more rugged. They followed a narrow path that wound through a dense forest of oak and hickory, climbing steadily toward a ridge that loomed ahead. The exertion was becoming difficult for Eleanor, and she found herself pausing more frequently to catch her breath. During one such rest, perched on a fallen log while Maka waited patiently, Eleanor felt a sharp pain lance through her abdomen. She gasped, doubling over slightly. Maka was at her side instantly, concern etched on his features. "Baby comes?" "No," Eleanor managed through gritted teeth as the pain subsided. "It's too early. Just a cramp, I think." Maka frowned, clearly unconvinced. "We stop. Rest longer." "I can continue," Eleanor insisted, not wanting to appear weak or ungrateful. "We're close, aren't we?" "Close enough," Maka agreed reluctantly. "But the mountain path is steep, not good for a mother with a child." Before Eleanor could protest, Maka had disappeared into the underbrush. He returned moments later with a sturdy branch that he quickly fashioned into a walking stick, smoothing away the smaller twigs with his knife and testing its strength before presenting it to her. "This help," he said simply. Eleanor accepted the staff gratefully, using it to lever herself to her feet. "Thank you." They continued at an even slower pace, with Maka now staying close to Eleanor's side, ready to steady her if needed. The path grew steeper, winding through rocky outcroppings and stands of pine trees that released their sharp, clean scent into the warm air. As they crested the ridge, Eleanor stopped in wonder. Below them stretched a hidden valley, nestled between protecting mountains like a secret garden. A clear stream wound through its center, and along its banks she could make out the shapes of about 24 conical structures. Wigwams, she recalled they were called, made from bent saplings covered with bark or animal hides. Smoke rose from several small fires, and figures moved about the camp, women grinding corn or tending to cooking pots, children playing a game that involved throwing small sticks, men gathered in what appeared to be a council. "Your home," Eleanor breathed. "My people," Maka corrected gently. "Home is—" He gestured vaguely, encompassing the valley, the mountains, the forests. "All this." As they began their descent toward the village, Eleanor felt a flutter of apprehension. "Will your chief allow me to stay? Chief Grey Wolf is a wise man," Maka said. "Listen before you decide." But he hesitated. "Stay close to me. Some warriors do not like white face in village." Eleanor nodded, suddenly very aware of her pale skin, her blue eyes, her European features that marked her as unmistakably different. As they approached the first wigwams, activity in the village slowed, then stopped altogether as people turned to stare at the strange pair making their way toward the center of the settlement. Children were quickly gathered by watchful mothers. Men reached for weapons, though they did not draw them. The hostility was palpable, a living thing that pressed against Eleanor's skin like the summer heat. Maka walked tall, his expression revealing nothing. But Eleanor noticed that he had positioned himself slightly in front of her, a subtle gesture of protection. An elderly man emerged from the largest wigwam, his long grey hair braided with eagle feathers, his face deeply lined by age and experience. He wore a ceremonial robe decorated with intricate beadwork, and the way the others deferred to him made it clear this was Chief Grey Wolf. The chief and Maka exchanged words in Shawnee, too rapid for Eleanor to follow, even if she had understood. The language. Maka gestured toward her several times, and once placed his hand over his heart in what seemed to be an earnest pledge. Finally, the chief approached Eleanor. His dark eyes were sharp with intelligence, missing nothing as they took in her condition. Her exhaustion, her fear. "Maka say you cast out," Grey Wolf said in surprisingly good English, "left to die with an unborn child." "Yes," Eleanor replied, meeting his gaze directly. "The wagon train felt I would slow their journey." The chief's expression hardened. "White men often leave their weak behind, like wolves with injured pack member." He glanced at her swollen belly. "But you are not weak. You carry the future, this sacred thing." Relief washed through Eleanor. "Then I may stay until the baby comes?" Grey Wolf exchanged another long look. With Maka before nodding slowly. "You may stay. Maka speaks for you. His honor is now bound to yours." He turned to address the gathered villagers in Shawnee, his voice carrying the unmistakable tone of a proclamation. When he finished speaking, there was a moment of tense silence. Then a grudging acceptance seemed to settle over the crowd. They did not welcome her with open arms, but neither did they protest openly against her presence. "Come," Maka said quietly. "I'll show you where to sleep." As he led her toward a wigwam set slightly apart from the others, Eleanor became aware of the whispers that followed them, the curious and sometimes hostile stares. But Maka's presence beside her was steady and reassuring. The wigwam was small, but clean, with a central fire pit and sleeping pallets arranged around it. Fresh furs covered the ground, and bundles of dried herbs hung from the framework, filling the air with a pleasant, earthy scent. "This is your place now," Maka said. "My sister Nadie will bring food soon. She will help you. This is your home." Eleanor realized. "Where will you stay?" "Men's lodge," Maka replied with a small shrug, "until the baby come. Then we see." The implication hung in the air between them, that her future and that of her child remained uncertain. The Shawnee had offered temporary sanctuary, not a permanent home. As if reading her thoughts, Maka added, "Winter soon, pass back to white settlements closed by snow until spring. You stay until then, at least." It was both reassurance and reminder. She was trapped here, whether she wished to be or not. But given the alternative, Eleanor could only be grateful. "Thank you, Maka," she said softly, "for everything." He nodded once, then ducked out of the wigwam, leaving Eleanor alone with her thoughts and the child that stirred within her womb, a child that would now be born far from its father's people, in a village of those who had every reason to be enemies. As she settled onto the sleeping pallet, easing her aching body onto the soft furs, Eleanor wondered what Thomas would think of the strange turn her journey had taken. He had always been practical, focused on survival above all else. Surely he would understand that she had no choice. But as the distant sounds of the Shawnee village filtered through the wigwam walls, children's laughter, women's voices, the rhythmic pounding of someone stretching a hide, Eleanor felt the first stirring of something unexpected. Not just gratitude for her rescue, but curiosity about these people who had taken her in despite their misgivings. About Maka, who had risked his standing in the tribe to protect a woman he did not know. from a people who had taken so much from his own. Outside, the afternoon sun cast long shadows across the valley. Inside the wigwam, Eleanor Pritchard placed both hands on her swollen belly and made a silent promise to her unborn child to survive, to learn, to find a way forward in this unexpected chapter of their shared story. And perhaps, in time, to repay the debt she owed to the Shawnee hunter who had become her unlikely savior. The first week in the Shawnee village passed in a blur of exhaustion and adjustment for Eleanor. True to Marka's word, his sister Nadia had appeared shortly after he left, bearing a wooden bowl of stewed venison and wild onions. The woman was younger than Eleanor by perhaps 5 years, her dark eyes wary but not unkind as she set the food down and gestured for Eleanor to eat. "Thank you," Eleanor had said, but Nadia had already slipped out of the wigwam without a word. Each day followed a similar pattern. Eleanor would wake with the dawn chorus of birds, their songs filtering through the wigwam walls. Nadia would bring food, simple fare of cornmeal cakes, dried berries, stewed game, or fish from the stream. The Shawnee woman rarely spoke, but her initial wariness gradually softened into something like cautious curiosity. By the third day, Nadia had begun to linger after delivering meals, watching Eleanor with undisguised interest. On the fourth morning, she finally broke her silence. "Baby, move," she asked, gesturing to Eleanor's belly. Eleanor nodded, placing a hand where her child had just kicked. "Would you like to feel?" Nadia hesitated, then moved closer, her slender hand reaching out tentatively. When the baby kicked against her palm, her solemn face broke into a surprised smile, the first Eleanor had seen from any of the Shawnee except Marka. "Strong," Nadia declared approvingly. "Like a warrior." "Or like his father," Eleanor said softly. A pang of grief sharpening the words, Nadia's dark eyes studied her face. "Husband, good man?" "Yes," Eleanor replied simply. "He was." The Shawnee woman nodded, then unexpectedly placed her hand over Eleanor's in a gesture of sympathy that transcended language and culture. In that moment, a fragile connection formed between them, two women from different worlds, yet bound by common experiences of love and loss. Marka visited each evening, bringing fresh game or fish and checking on Eleanor's welfare. He would sit across the fire pit, his face highlighted by the dancing flames, and answer her questions about Shawnee life. Eleanor learned that the tribe had once controlled vast territories that spanned what white settlers now called Kentucky, Ohio, and parts of Pennsylvania, lands that had been systematically taken through treaties that were rarely honored. "This valley is the last place," Marka explained one evening, his voice tinged with resignation. "Hidden. White men have not found yet." "And when will they do?" Eleanor asked, though she already knew the answer. Marka's gaze met hers steadily. "Then we move again, or fight, or die." He shrugged, a gesture that belied the gravity of his words. This way for many seasons now. Eleanor thought of the wagon train heading west, of the thousands of settlers flooding into territories that had once belonged to people like Marka. She had never questioned the right of white Americans to claim these lands. It had been presented as manifest destiny, as progress, as civilization spreading across the continent. Now, sitting in a Shawnee wigwam, she saw the other side of that grand narrative, the displacement, the loss, the struggle to preserve a way of life that was being systematically destroyed. "I'm sorry," she said, the words inadequate but sincere. "You do not take land," Marka replied, echoing his earlier statement. But this time he added, "But your people did, still do." The accusation hung in the air between them, undeniable. Eleanor had no defense to offer, no justification that didn't ring hollow in the face of Marka's quiet dignity. After a week of rest, Eleanor began to venture outside the wigwam, first to sit in the sun beside the entrance, then to take short walks around the perimeter of the village. The Shawnee women watched her with undisguised curiosity, some hostile, others merely cautious. The children were less reserved, darting close to stare at her pale skin and light brown hair, before running away, giggling when she smiled at them. It was during one such excursion that Eleanor met Singing Bird, an elderly woman whose deeply lined face and clouded eyes spoke of a lifetime of hardship. Unexpectedly, the old woman approached Eleanor as she rested beside a large oak tree, lowering herself with surprising grace to sit cross-legged on the ground nearby. "You carry life," Singing Bird said in halting English, gesturing toward Eleanor's. "And Belly, this is a good thing." "Yes," Eleanor agreed, surprised by the direct address. Most of the villagers still avoided speaking to her directly. Singing Bird nodded, her weathered hands moving to a small pouch at her waist. From it, she withdrew a bundle of dried herbs that gave off a pleasant, minty scent. "For pain," she explained, pressing the bundle into Eleanor's hand. "When the baby comes, make tea." Eleanor accepted the gift with genuine gratitude. "Thank you. I don't know when the baby will come exactly. I think in 2 moons. The old woman's eyes crinkled at the corners. "Baby comes when ready, not before, not after." She paused, her gaze becoming distant. "I help many mothers, before white sickness come." Eleanor understood she was referring to the epidemics that had devastated native populations. Smallpox, measles, influenza, diseases brought by European settlers that had wiped out entire villages. "Would you—" Eleanor hesitated, then pushed forward. "Would you help me? When will my time comes?" Singing Bird studied her for a long moment, ancient wisdom in her faded eyes. "Yes," she finally said. "I help. Baby not know if mother white or Shawnee. Baby only know mother's heart." From that day forward, Singing Bird became Eleanor's most unexpected ally in the village. The old healer visited regularly, bringing herbal remedies to ease Eleanor's swollen ankles and aching back, teaching her Shawnee words and customs, and sharing stories of her long life that spanned the time before white settlers had pushed into Shawnee lands. Through these conversations, Eleanor began to grasp the profound connection the Shawnee felt to the land, not as property to be owned and exploited, but as a living entity to be honored and protected. It was a perspective that challenged everything she had been raised to believe about progress and civilization. As September yielded to October, the valley blazed with autumn colors, the maples turning fiery red, the oaks a deep, burnished gold. The days grew shorter, the nights cooler, and the Shawnee intensified their preparations for the coming winter. Women worked tirelessly to preserve food, smoking meat, drying berries, storing nuts and seeds in tightly woven baskets. Men hunted from dawn until dusk, bringing back deer, rabbit, and wild turkey to add to the winter stores. Eleanor, now in her 8th month of pregnancy, found herself increasingly frustrated by her inability to contribute to these efforts. Her condition limited her mobility, and while the tribe tolerated her presence, few besides Nadi, Marka, and Singing Bird made any effort to include her in daily activities. It was Nadi who finally took pity on her restlessness. One crisp morning, she appeared at the wigwam with a basket of unprocessed fibers and sat down beside Eleanor. "You learn," she stated simply, demonstrating how to twist the plant fibers into strong, flexible cordage. A skill Eleanor had never acquired in her life among white settlers, where rope and twine were purchased ready-made from stores. Eleanor's first attempts were clumsy, yielding uneven results that Nadi wordlessly unraveled, guiding her to try again. By midday, Eleanor had produced several feet of serviceable cord, and the sense of accomplishment far outweighed the soreness in her. Fingers Good, Nadie approved, examining Eleanor's work. Tomorrow more. True to her word, Nadie returned the next day and the next, gradually introducing Eleanor to other tasks she could manage despite her advanced pregnancy, weaving simple baskets, preparing certain herbs for winter storage, even basic beadwork on soft deerskin. These activities not only gave Eleanor purpose, but also brought her into closer contact with the other women of the tribe. At first, they maintained their distance, working alongside her in stony silence. But as days passed, the barriers began to erode. A word of correction here, a nod of approval there. Occasionally even a shared smile over a task well done. Eleanor came to understand that the women's initial hostility stemmed not from personal animosity, but from fear. Fear of the changes white settlement had already brought to their world, fear of what her presence might mean for their precarious sanctuary. In their position, she reflected, she might have felt the same. It was during one of these working sessions that Eleanor experienced her first serious contraction, a sharp, cramping pain that caused her to gasp and drop the basket she had been weaving. The nearest woman, a stoic matron named Dancing Fawn, looked up sharply. "Baby?" she asked tersely. Eleanor shook her head as the pain subsided. "Too early," she insisted, though a flutter of anxiety rose in her chest. The baby wasn't due for at least 3 more weeks. Dancing Fawn frowned, then rose and disappeared into her wigwam, returning moments later with Singing Bird. The elderly healer took one look at Eleanor's face and gestured for her to lie back on a nearby fur. With practiced hands, Singing Bird felt Eleanor's swollen abdomen, her touch gentle but thorough. "Not time," she finally pronounced. "False pains, body practices." She helped Eleanor to a sitting position. "But no more work today. Rest." Eleanor nodded, relieved, but chastened. "I'll return to the wigwam." "I help," Dancing Fawn unexpectedly offered, stepping forward to support Eleanor's elbow as she stood. The brief episode seemed to shift something in the tribe's perception of Eleanor. Word spread quickly, and by evening, several women had stopped by Maka's wigwam, each bringing some small offering. An extra blanket, a poultice for backache, a wooden cup of sweetened tea. Maka, arriving at dusk with a brace of rabbits, raised an eyebrow at the collection of gifts. "What happened?" Eleanor explained the false labor and the surprising response it had generated. Maka nodded thoughtfully. "Birth sacred to my people. Mother who bears child is honored, even if—" He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Even if from an enemy. Tribe," the statement hung between them. A reminder that despite the growing acceptance, Eleanor remained an outsider, a representative of the people who threatened the Shawnee way of life. It was a reality neither of them could escape, regardless of the unexpected bonds that had formed. That night, lying on her sleeping pallet while the baby performed acrobatics beneath her ribs, Eleanor confronted the question she had been avoiding. What would happen after the birth? The mountain passes would remain snowbound until spring, making a return to white settlements impossible for months. Would the tribe's tolerance extend to a newborn, half-white child? And what about when spring came? The thought of returning to the world that had cast her out held little appeal. Yet what place could there be for her and her child among the Shawnee? The questions chased each other through her mind, unanswerable and disquieting. October advanced, the nights growing longer and colder. The first frost silvered the valley one morning, transforming the world into a glittering wonderland that melted. Away by midday, the Shawnee marked the changing season with a harvest ceremony, a night of drumming, singing, and dancing around a massive bonfire in the center of the village. Eleanor watched from the doorway of Maka's wigwam, mesmerized by the ancient rhythms and haunting melodies that filled the night air. The dancers moved with fluid grace, their bodies telling stories she could sense but not fully comprehend. Tales of the hunt, of battles won and lost, of the eternal cycle of seasons. Maka appeared beside her, his face painted with red and black designs that accentuated his strong features. In the firelight, adorned in his ceremonial attire, he seemed both familiar and strange, a bridge between worlds, yet firmly rooted in his own. "Beautiful," Eleanor murmured, nodding toward the celebration. "I'm sorry," she said, the words inadequate but sincere. "You do not take land," Maka replied, echoing his earlier statement. But this time he added, "But your people did, still do." The accusation hung in the air between them, undeniable. Eleanor had no defense to offer, no justification that didn't ring hollow in the face of Maka's quiet dignity. After a week of rest, Eleanor began to venture outside the wigwam, first to sit in the sun beside the entrance, then to take short walks around the perimeter of the village. The Shawnee women watched her with undisguised curiosity, some hostile, others merely cautious. The children were less reserved, darting close to stare at her pale skin and light brown hair, before running away giggling when she smiled at them. It was during one such excursion that Eleanor met Singing Bird, an elderly woman whose deeply lined face and clouded eyes spoke of a lifetime of hardship. Unexpectedly, the old woman approached Eleanor as she rested beside a large oak tree, lowering herself with surprising grace to sit cross-legged on the ground nearby. "You carry life," Singing Bird said in halting English, gesturing toward Eleanor's belly. "This is a good thing." "Yes," Eleanor agreed, surprised by the direct address. Most of the villagers still avoided speaking to her directly. Singing Bird nodded, her weathered hands moving to a small pouch at her waist. From it, she withdrew a bundle of dried herbs that gave off a pleasant, minty scent. "For pain," she explained, pressing the bundle into Eleanor's hand. "When the baby comes, make tea." Eleanor accepted the gift with genuine gratitude. "Thank you. I don't know when the baby will come exactly. I think in 2 moons. The old woman's eyes crinkled at the corners. "Baby comes when ready, not before, not after." She paused, her gaze becoming distant. "I help many mothers. Before white sickness come." Eleanor understood she was referring to the epidemics that had devastated native populations: smallpox, measles, influenza, diseases brought by European settlers that had wiped out entire villages. "Would you—" Eleanor hesitated, then pushed forward. "Would you help me? When will my time comes?" Singing Bird studied her for a long moment, ancient wisdom in her faded eyes. "Yes," she finally said. "I help. Baby not know if Mother White or Shawnee. Baby only know Mother's heart." From that day forward, Singing Bird became Eleanor's most unexpected ally in the village. The old healer visited regularly, bringing herbal remedies to ease Eleanor's swollen ankles and aching back, teaching her Shawnee words and customs, and sharing stories of her long life that spanned the time before white settlers had pushed into Shawnee lands. Through these conversations, Eleanor began to grasp the profound connection the Shawnee felt to the land, not as property to be owned and exploited, but as a living entity to be honored and protected. It was a perspective that challenged everything she had been raised to believe about progress and civilization. As September yielded to October, the valley blazed with autumn colors, the maples turning fiery red, the oaks a deep burnished gold. The days grew shorter, the nights cooler, and the Shawnee intensified their preparations for the coming winter. Women worked tirelessly to preserve food, smoking meat, drying berries, storing nuts and seeds in tightly woven baskets. Men hunted from dawn until dusk, bringing back deer, rabbit, and wild turkey to add to the winter stores. Eleanor, now in her 8th month of pregnancy, found herself increasingly frustrated by her inability to contribute to these efforts. Her condition limited her mobility, and while the tribe tolerated her presence, few besides Nadi, Maka, and Singing Bird made any effort to include her in daily activities. It was Nadi who finally took pity on her restlessness. One crisp morning, she appeared at the wigwam with a basket of unprocessed fibers and sat down beside Eleanor. "You learn," she stated simply, demonstrating how to twist the plant fibers into strong, flexible cordage, a skill Eleanor had never acquired in her life among white settlers, where rope and twine were purchased ready-made from stores. Eleanor's first attempts were clumsy, yielding uneven results that Nadi wordlessly unraveled, guiding her to try again. By midday, Eleanor had produced several feet of serviceable cord, and the sense of accomplishment far outweighed the soreness in her. "Fingers, good," Nadi approved, examining Eleanor's work. "Tomorrow more." True to her word, Nadi returned the next day and the next, gradually introducing Eleanor to other tasks she could manage despite her advanced pregnancy. Weaving simple baskets, preparing certain herbs for winter storage, even basic beadwork. On soft deerskin, these activities not only gave Eleanor purpose, but also brought her into closer contact with the other women of the tribe. At first, they maintained their distance, working alongside her in stony silence. But as days passed, the barriers began to erode. A word of correction here, a nod of approval there, occasionally even a shared smile over a task well done. Eleanor came to understand that the women's initial hostility stemmed not from personal animosity, but from fear. Fear of the changes white settlement had already brought to their world. Fear of what her presence might mean for their precarious sanctuary. In their position, she reflected, she might have felt the same. It was during one of these working sessions that Eleanor experienced her first serious contraction, a sharp, cramping pain that caused her to gasp and drop the basket she had been weaving. The nearest woman, a stoic matron named Dancing Fawn, looked up sharply. "Baby?" she asked tersely. Eleanor shook her head as the pain subsided. "Too early," she insisted, though a flutter of anxiety rose in her chest. The baby wasn't due for at least 3 more weeks. Dancing Fawn frowned, then rose and disappeared into her wigwam. Returning moments later with Singing Bird, the elderly healer took one look at Eleanor's face and gestured for her to lie back on a nearby fur. With practiced hands, Singing Bird felt Eleanor's swollen abdomen, her touch gentle but thorough. "Not time," she finally pronounced. "False pains, body practices." She helped Eleanor to a sitting position, but no more work today. Rest. Eleanor nodded, relieved but chastened. "I'll return to the wigwam." "I help," Dancing Fawn unexpectedly offered, stepping forward to support Eleanor's elbow as she stood. The brief episode seemed to shift something in the tribe's perception of Eleanor. Word spread quickly, and by evening several women had stopped by Maka's wigwam, each bringing some small offering: an extra blanket, a poultice for backache, a wooden cup of sweetened tea. Maka, arriving at dusk with a brace of rabbits, raised an eyebrow at the collection of gifts. "What happened?" Eleanor explained the false labor and the surprising response it had generated. Maka nodded thoughtfully. "Birth sacred to my people. Mother who bears child is honored, even if—" He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Even if from an enemy. Tribe." The statement hung between them, a reminder that despite the growing acceptance, Eleanor remained an outsider, a representative of the people who threatened the Shawnee way of life. It was a reality neither of them could escape, regardless of the unexpected bonds that had formed. That night, lying on her sleeping pallet while the baby performed acrobatics beneath her ribs, Eleanor confronted the question she had been avoiding. What would happen after the birth? The mountain passes would remain snowbound until spring, making a return to white settlements impossible for months. Would the tribe's tolerance extend to a newborn half-white child? And what about when spring came? The thought of returning to the world that had cast her out held little appeal. Yet what place could there be for her and her child among the Shawnee? The questions chased each other through her mind, unanswerable and disquieting. October advanced, the nights growing longer and colder. The first frost silvered the valley one morning, transforming the world into a glittering wonderland that melted away by midday. The Shawnee marked the changing season with a harvest ceremony, a night of drumming, singing and dancing around a massive bonfire in the center of the village. Eleanor watched from the doorway of Mahka's wigwam, mesmerized by the ancient rhythms and haunting melodies that filled the night air. The dancers moved with fluid grace, their bodies telling stories she could sense but not fully comprehend, tales of the hunt, of battles won and lost, of the eternal cycle of seasons. Mahka appeared beside her, his face painted with red and black designs that accentuated his strong features. In the firelight, adorned in his ceremonial attire, he seemed both familiar and strange, a bridge between worlds, yet firmly rooted in his own. "Beautiful," Eleanor murmured, nodding toward the celebration. "Old ways," Mahka replied, a note of pride in his voice. "Remember who we are. Where do you come from?" Eleanor nodded, understanding the significance of preserving traditions in the face of loss. "Thank you for sharing this with me." Mahka's gaze met hers, warm and steady in the flickering light. "You learn our ways, try to understand, not like most white people." It was the closest thing to a personal compliment he had offered, and Eleanor felt a flush of pleasure at his words. Over the weeks, she had come to respect Mahka deeply, his quiet strength, his unwavering honor, his kindness to a woman who, by all rights, he should have considered an enemy. "Your people have been generous," she said softly, "when my own abandoned me." Mahka was silent for a moment, his expression thoughtful. "When snow melts," he finally said, "what you do, return to white settlements?" The question caught Eleanor off guard, though it mirrored her own earlier thoughts. I don't know," she admitted. "There's nothing for me there, no family, no land. And your child," Mahka pressed, "half white, half Pritchard, belong with white people, no?" Eleanor placed a protective hand over her belly. "My child belongs with me," she said firmly. "And I—" She hesitated, the truth of her next words surprising even herself. "I've found more kindness here than among my own people." Mahka studied her face, his expression unreadable. "Winter long," he finally said. "Many moons to decide." Before Eleanor could respond, a sudden commotion arose from the far side of the village. Shouts of alarm, the barking of dogs, the sound of running feet. Mahka tensed, his hand moving instinctively to the knife at his belt. "Stay here," he commanded, already moving toward the disturbance. But Eleanor, driven by curiosity and concern, stepped out of the wigwam to see what was happening. A crowd had gathered at the eastern edge of the village, warriors positioning themselves protectively before the women and children. Through the gap between bodies, Eleanor caught a glimpse of what had caused the alarm. A white man, haggard and half-frozen, being held between two Shawnee hunters. Her heart lurched in her chest. A settler, a scout, someone from the wagon train? Despite Mahka's instruction to stay back, Eleanor found herself moving forward, drawn by an inexplicable sense of dread and recognition. As she approached, the crowd parted slightly, allowing her a clearer view of the captive. He was tall and gaunt, his clothes torn and dirty, his beard overgrown. But there was something familiar in the set of his shoulders, in the way he held his head despite his precarious position. Eleanor pushed forward, ignoring the murmurs that followed her movement through the crowd. The captive looked up at the commotion, his exhausted eyes widening in shock as they landed on her swollen figure. "Eleanor!" The word was barely a whisper, rough with disbelief. Eleanor stopped short, her hand flying to her mouth to stifle a cry of shock. It wasn't possible. It couldn't be, but it was. Standing before her, a ghost returned from the grave, was Thomas Pritchard, her husband, the father of her child, the man she had buried by the trail 3 months earlier. Thomas? Her voice broke on his name, the world swimming before her eyes. How? Before he could answer, another contraction gripped her, fiercer than the one before, doubling her over with its intensity. As she clutched her belly, she felt a warm rush of fluid down her legs, soaking through her dress to the ground below. Through the haze of shock and pain, she heard Singing Bird's voice, urgent and commanding. "Baby comes now." The last thing Eleanor saw before the women led her away was Marker's face, his expression a complex mixture of concern, confusion, and something that looked remarkably like loss. The child who had survived the journey from Pennsylvania, who had endured the abandonment by the wagon train, who had grown in the shelter of a Shawnee village, was ready to enter the world, a world suddenly turned upside down by the miraculous return of a father thought forever lost. As another contraction seized her, Eleanor realized that the future she had been contemplating, a life among the Shawnee, perhaps even alongside Marker, had just shattered like ice on a spring river. Thomas was alive, her husband had returned, and nothing would ever be the same again. Pain unlike anything Eleanor had ever known tore through her body as the women of the tribe guided her back to Marker's wigwam. Singing Bird walked beside her, one weathered hand supporting Eleanor's elbow, her voice a steady stream of encouragement in a mixture of Shawnee and broken English. "Strong woman," the elder murmured, "strong baby. All will be well." Eleanor wanted to believe her, but the shock of Thomas's appearance combined with the intensity of her labor left her mind reeling. How could he be alive? She had watched as fever consumed him, had felt the last breath leave his body, had helped dig his grave by the side of the trail. Yet there he stood, gaunt and weathered but unmistakably Thomas. Another contraction seized her, driving all other thoughts from her mind. She gasped, clutching at Nadie's arm, as the young woman helped lower her onto the sleeping pallet in Marker's wigwam. "Breathe!" Singing Bird instructed, demonstrating with exaggerated inhales and exhales, like wind in trees. "Steady." Eleanor tried to follow the old woman's example, but her breath caught on a sob. "My husband," she managed between contractions. "I need to speak with him." Singing Bird exchanged glances with Nadie, who hovered anxiously at the wigwam entrance. "Man who come is husband? Man you say die?" "Yes," Eleanor confirmed, wincing as another wave of pain built. "I don't understand how—" "Later," Singing Bird said firmly. "Now baby comes. Nothing else matters." She was right, of course. The child would not wait for explanations or reunions. Eleanor surrendered to the ancient rhythm of birth, allowing the Shawnee women to guide her through the process that was both universal and uniquely her own. Hours blurred into a haze of pain, sweat, and focused effort, the wigwam filled with the scent of medicinal herbs as Singing Bird brewed teas to ease Eleanor's discomfort and strengthen her resolve. Nadie remained by her side, wiping her brow with cool cloths and offering silent support. Other women came and went, bringing fresh water, additional blankets, whispered advice. Through it all, Eleanor caught fragments of conversation from outside, the deep rumble of male voices in council, occasionally rising in what sounded like heated debate. Once she was certain she heard Thomas call her name, his voice frantic with worry. Another time, Marker's distinctive tones cut through the haze of her pain, calm but unyielding. As evening shadows lengthened into night, Eleanor's labor intensified. Singing Bird positioned herself at the foot of the sleeping pallet, her ancient eyes sharp with focus despite the dim light of the small fire. "Soon now," she announced. Baby ready to meet mother. Eleanor nodded, too exhausted for words. She had imagined this moment countless times during her pregnancy, but never like this, never among strangers in a Shawnee village, with Thomas somehow returned from the dead and waiting outside. With a final, tremendous effort, Eleanor brought her child into the world, a robust cry announcing his arrival as Singing Bird skillfully received him into her weathered hands. "Son," the old woman proclaimed with evident satisfaction. "Strong son." She placed the squalling infant on Eleanor's chest, where he immediately began to root against her skin, instinct guiding him toward nourishment. Eleanor stared down at the tiny life she had carried for so long, the dark, damp curls plastered to his head, the perfect miniature fingers that flexed and grasped, the fierce red face contorted with the effort of his first breaths. "Hello, little one," she whispered, tears streaming down her cheeks. "You've had quite a journey already." As Singing Bird efficiently completed the birthing process, Nadie helped Eleanor position the infant to nurse. The sensation was strange, but not unpleasant, and Eleanor marveled at the instant primal connection she felt to this small being who had been part of her body only moments before. "He has his father's chin," she murmured, tracing a gentle finger along the infant's jawline. Nadie frowned slightly. "Which father?" she asked softly, her meaning clear. Did Eleanor refer to Thomas, the returned husband, or to the child's Shawnee heritage that would have been his future had Thomas truly died? Before Eleanor could respond, Singing Bird shooed the younger woman away. "No questions now," she scolded. "Mother and child rest. Talk comes later." Eleanor was grateful for the reprieve. The truth was, she didn't know how to answer. The past few months had changed her in ways she was only beginning to understand. The woman who had left Pennsylvania with Thomas, naive, sheltered, certain of her place in the world, was gone, replaced by someone who had been forced to confront the complexities of survival, of cultural understanding, of unexpected alliances. And there was Marka. The Shawnee hunter had saved her life, had given her shelter, had introduced her to his people's ways with patience and dignity. He had treated her with a respect that transcended the bitter history between their races. In the process, he had become more than a rescuer. He had become a friend, a teacher, perhaps something more that Eleanor had not yet allowed herself to fully acknowledge. Now Thomas had returned, upending everything once again. Eleanor closed, her eyes cradling her newborn son as she drifted into an exhausted sleep. She woke to pale morning light filtering through the wigwam walls and the soft murmur of voices outside. Her son slept peacefully beside her, swaddled in a soft deerskin blanket that one of the women must have prepared. Every detail of his tiny face fascinated her. The sweep of dark lashes against his cheeks, the perfect bow of his mouth, the slight furrow between his brows as he dreamed his newborn dreams. The wigwam flap rustled, and Singing Bird entered, carrying a steaming wooden bowl. "Drink," she instructed, helping Eleanor to sit up without disturbing the baby. "Give strength, make milk good." The broth was rich and savory, warming Eleanor from the inside out. As she drank, Singing Bird checked the infant with practiced hands, nodding in approval at what she found. "Healthy boy," she pronounced. "Good lungs, strong heart." She paused, studying Eleanor's face. "Men wait outside, husband and Marka." Eleanor's pulse quickened, both of them. Singing Bird nodded. "Chief, say you rest today. Tomorrow council hears husband's story." She tilted her head, her ancient eyes sharp with perception. "You ready to see them? One at a time?" "No." Eleanor. And thought she wasn't ready. How could she be? But delaying the inevitable would solve nothing. "Thomas first," she decided. "Please." Singing Bird nodded and slipped out of the wigwam. Moments later, the entrance flap parted again, and Thomas ducked, Inside, his tall frame seeming too large for the confined space. He stood awkwardly just inside the entrance, his eyes fixed on Eleanor and the bundle in her arms. "Eleanor," he breathed, his voice rough with emotion. "They told me you'd had the baby. A son?" Eleanor nodded, shifting the sleeping infant so Thomas could see his face. "Yes, he was born last night." Thomas took a tentative step forward, then another, as if afraid she might vanish if he moved too quickly. His appearance shocked her anew. The gaunt face, the overgrown beard, the haunted look in his eyes. This was not the robust, confident man who had led her west. This was someone marked by suffering. "May I?" he asked, gesturing toward the sleeping pallet. At Eleanor's nod, he lowered himself to sit beside her, his gaze never leaving the child's face. "He's perfect," he whispered, extending a finger to gently touch the infant's cheek. "What have you named him?" "I haven't yet," Eleanor admitted. It all happened so fast. She studied her husband's face, still struggling to reconcile his presence with the memory of his death. "Thomas, how is this possible? I buried you. I watched you die." Thomas's eyes clouded with remembered pain. "I thought I was dying too. The fever. I don't remember much after we made camp that night. Fragments, nightmares mostly." He ran a hand through his unkempt hair. "I woke in a shallow grave, covered with just enough dirt to keep the animals away. Weak as a newborn calf, but alive." Eleanor shuddered at the image. "But why didn't you call out? The wagon train was still there." "No," Thomas interrupted. "They were gone. Must have buried me and moved on at first light." His expression hardened. "Left you to manage alone?" "Not exactly," Eleanor said softly. "They took me with them at first. But later, when I slowed them down..." She let the sentence trail off, unwilling to relive the moment of abandonment. Thomas's jaw tightened. "Blackwell," he growled. "I should have known that bastard would..." He broke off, taking a deep breath to compose himself. "When I realized what had happened, I tried to follow the wagon trail. Took me weeks to regain my strength, and by then, the tracks were old. But I kept going, determined to catch up. How did you survive?" "Barely," Thomas admitted. "I had my knife, managed to set a few snares for rabbits, found berries, edible roots, drank from streams. But winter was coming, and I was still too weak for that kind of journey. If the Shawnee hunters hadn't found me..." He shook his head. "I would have died for real this time." The irony wasn't lost on Eleanor. Both she and Thomas had been saved by the people they had been raised to fear. "They brought you to the village," she prompted. Thomas nodded. "Trussed up like a turkey for roasting. I thought they meant to kill me until I saw you." His eyes searched her face. "Eleanor, what happened? How did you end up here among them?" She told him then about Blackwell's decision to leave her behind, about her desperate first day alone, about Maka finding her and bringing her to the village. She spoke of the initial wariness of the tribe, of Singing Bird's wisdom, of Nadi's gradual friendship, of learning Shawnee ways. What she didn't mention was the growing connection she had felt to Maka, the quiet evenings spent in conversation. By the fire, the respect that had gradually deepened into something more complex. That was a complication she was not yet ready to address, even in her own mind. Thomas listened intently, his expression darkening at the account of her abandonment, softening at the tribe's eventual acceptance of her. When she finished, he took her hand in his. "I've failed you," he said hoarsely. "I promised to protect you, to provide for you and our child. Instead, you've endured all this alone." "Not alone," Eleanor corrected gently. "The Shawnee took me in when our own people cast me out. They've been..." She searched for the right word. "Kind, honorable." "The hunter who found you," Thomas said, a note of something unidentifiable in his voice. "Maka. He's their leader?" "No, Chief Grey Wolf leads the tribe. Maka is a respected warrior and hunter. She hesitated. He gave up his wigwam. For me, spoke for me to the council, taught me their ways. Thomas's expression tightened almost imperceptibly. I owe him a debt, then, for protecting my wife and child. The words were correct, but something in his tone made Eleanor uneasy. Before she could respond, the baby stirred, his tiny face scrunching in preparation for a cry. Thomas watched in fascination as Eleanor shifted the infant to nurse. "What shall we name him?" he asked, his voice gentling as he observed the child. Eleanor considered. She had thought of naming the baby after Thomas, but now that seemed too complicated. "William," she suggested, "after my father." Thomas smiled, the first genuine smile she had seen from him since his return. William Pritchard, a good, strong name. He reached out to stroke the infant's head. "When you're stronger, we'll need to discuss our plans. The mountain passes will be closed soon, but come spring." He left the sentence unfinished, but his meaning was clear. Come spring, they would leave the Shawnee village, return to the world of white settlers, continue the journey west that had been interrupted by tragedy and unexpected turns. The thought filled Eleanor with a confusion of emotions she wasn't prepared to untangle. For now, she simply nodded, focusing on the hungry child at her breast rather than the uncertain future. "You should rest," Thomas said, rising to his feet. "We have time to sort everything out." As he moved toward the wigwam entrance, Eleanor called after him, "Thomas, are you well now? The fever?" He paused, his back to her. "Well enough," he said after a moment. "Changed, perhaps. As are you." He glanced back, his eyes meeting, hers with an intensity that stirred memories of their life before. "But we're together again. That's what matters." After he had gone, Eleanor leaned back against the firs, her mind spinning with the implications of Thomas's return. She had mourned him, had begun to build a new life without him, had started to envision a future among the Shawnee. Now that future had vanished, replaced by the resurrection of the life she had thought lost forever. Should she not be overjoyed? Thomas was alive. Her son would know his father. They could reclaim the dream that had brought them west, land, a home, a future of their own making. Yet as the afternoon shadows lengthened, Eleanor found herself listening for another footstep, another voice. Mahka had not come to see her or the child. His absence felt like a physical ache, an emptiness, where his steady presence had become a comfort. As if summoned by her thoughts, the wigwam flap rustled again. Eleanor's heart leapt, but it was Nadie who entered, carrying a fresh water skin and a small basket of food. "How is mother? How is son?" the young woman asked, her usual reserve softened by genuine concern. "We are both well," Eleanor assured her, shifting to make room for Nadie to sit beside her. "Thanks to you and Singing Bird." Nadie nodded, arranging the food within Eleanor's reach. "Brother asks after you," she said carefully, not meeting Eleanor's eyes. "Wants to know if the child's strong." So Mahka had not forgotten them. Eleanor felt a rush of warmth at the knowledge, followed immediately by a stab of guilt. "Tell him the baby is very strong," she replied. "Tell him—" She hesitated. "Tell him I would like to see him when he is ready." Nadie glanced up sharply, her dark eyes searching Eleanor's face. "Husband returned," she said, the statement half a question. "You go back to White World now?" The directness of the question caught Eleanor off guard. "I don't know," she admitted. "Everything has happened so fast." Nadie was silent for a moment, absently stroking the soft deerskin that wrapped the sleeping infant. "Brother changed since he found you," she finally said. "Smile more. Speak of the future." The implication was clear, though delicately stated. Mahka had begun to envision a future that included Eleanor and her child, a possibility that Thomas's return had abruptly foreclosed. "I never meant to cause pain," Eleanor said, softly. Nadie shrugged, the gesture reminiscent of her brother's. Heart chooses, she said simply. Then we follow, or we turn away. She rose gracefully to her feet. Rest now. Tomorrow is enough for hard choices. After Nadie left, Eleanor dozed fitfully, waking each time the baby stirred to nurse or be changed. As dusk settled over the village, she heard the distant sounds of the evening meal being prepared, of children being called home, of the day's activities winding down. The wigwam flap opened once more, admitting a tall, familiar figure silhouetted against the fading light. Maka stood motionless for a moment, as if uncertain of his welcome. "Come in," Eleanor invited, her voice barely above a whisper to avoid waking the baby nestled against her side. Maka entered silently, bringing with him the scent of wood smoke and pine forests. He carried a small bundle wrapped in soft hide, which he placed carefully at the foot of the sleeping pallet. "For the boy," he explained. "First gift." Eleanor reached for the package, unwrapping it to reveal a tiny moccasin-style shoe, exquisitely crafted from the softest deerskin and decorated with Shawnee beadwork in a pattern of stars. "It's beautiful," she breathed, tracing the intricate design with her fingertip. "Nadie make?" I asked her. Maka settled cross-legged on the ground, a respectful distance from where Eleanor reclined. "Boy healthy?" "Yes," Eleanor affirmed, shifting so Maka could see the sleeping infant's face. "Strong and hungry." A shadow of a smile touched Maka's lips as he observed the child. "Good son," he said approvingly. "What name?" "William," Eleanor told him. "After my father." Maka nodded, testing the name. "William, strong name." A silence fell between them, heavy with unspoken questions, with paths not taken, with futures now foreclosed. Eleanor found herself studying Maka's face, the strong line of his jaw, the slight furrow between his brows, the eyes that at first appeared so inscrutable to her, but which she had learned to read over the months of their acquaintance. "Thomas told me what happened," she finally said. "How he survived, how he searched for me." Maka nodded once. "Husband strong. Walk many days with little food. Great love for you." "Yes," Eleanor agreed softly. "As I loved him." The use of past, tense, hung in the air between them, unacknowledged but unmistakable. "Chief called the council tomorrow," Maka said. "Decide if the husband will stay in the village for winter. Too late now for the mountain journey." "And after winter?" Eleanor asked, though she already knew the answer. Maka's gaze was steady, unflinching. "After winter, the husband takes you back to White World. This is the right thing, is it?" The question escaped before Eleanor could reconsider. "The White World cast me out when I needed help. Your people took me in, taught me, protect me and my child. Because I brought you," Maka reminded her gently. "My honor is bound to yours. But my husband returned. Honor now says you go with him." Eleanor closed her eyes briefly, feeling the weight of traditions and expectations from both worlds pressing upon her. "And if I wished to stay?" The question hung in the air between them, dangerous and impossible to take back. Maka's expression remained carefully neutral, but something flickered in his eyes, hope quickly suppressed. "Village accepts you now. Accept the child." He hesitated. "But my husband would not stay, and a child needs a father." "William has a father," Eleanor said softly. "But he also needs people who will not abandon him at the first sign of trouble, who will teach him honor, courage, and respect for the land. These things my husband can teach," Maka countered, though without conviction. Eleanor shook her head slowly. "The white man's way is different. Land is something to own, to conquer. People who are different are to be feared, driven away." She gazed down at her sleeping son. "I'm not sure that's the life I want for him anymore." Maka was silent for a long moment, his expression troubled. "These are big thoughts," he finally said. "Not for now. Now is for healing, for new life." He rose to his feet in a single fluid motion. Rest. Tomorrow comes to the council. Tomorrow comes choice. As he turned to leave, Eleanor called after him softly. Marka. He paused, looking back. At her. Thank you, she said simply. For everything. A shadow of a smile touched his lips. Sleep well, Eleanor Pritchard. After he had gone, Eleanor turned her gaze to the tiny moccasin still clutched in her hand. Such a small thing, yet it represented so much, a gesture of acceptance, a symbol of a different path than the one she had originally envisioned for herself and her child. As darkness settled over the Shawnee village and the first stars appeared, in the sky above, Eleanor cradled her newborn son against her heart. Tomorrow would indeed bring choices, painful ones, with consequences that would echo through all their lives. Thomas or Marka, the white world or the Shawnee way, the path of expectation or the path of transformation. For tonight, though, she would simply hold her child close and be grateful for the miracle of new life amidst so much upheaval. William sighed in his sleep, his tiny fingers curling around her own in unconscious trust. Whatever choice she made, Eleanor vowed silently, it would be for him, for his future, for the man he would one day become, a man of honor, of courage, of compassion, a man who could perhaps bridge the divide between two worlds that saw each other only as enemies, never as the complex, flawed, yet worthy human beings that populated both. Outside, the night wind whispered, through the trees, carrying the ancient songs of the land that had witnessed the ebb and flow of peoples across its surface for countless generations. Within those whispers, Eleanor thought she heard a promise, that whatever path she chose, the journey would continue, unfolding in ways she could not yet imagine but must find the courage to embrace. Dawn broke crisp and clear over the Shawnee village, painting the wigwams with golden light that filtered through the remaining autumn leaves. Eleanor woke to the sound of William's hungry cries, his tiny fists waving in protest against the morning chill. She gathered him close, marveling once again at the miracle of his existence as he nursed contentedly. You've chosen quite the complicated world to enter, little one, she murmured, stroking his downy head. The council meeting loomed ahead, a gathering where Thomas's fate for the winter would be decided. But Eleanor knew that much more than temporary shelter hung in the balance. Today would set in motion decisions that would shape all their futures, decisions she was not yet prepared to make. Singing Bird arrived as Eleanor was changing William's swaddling clothes, bringing with her a steaming bowl of broth and a bundle of fresh healing herbs. Council meets at midday, the old woman announced, settling cross-legged beside the sleeping pallet. You come too. Bring a child. Eleanor looked up in surprise. I'm to attend? I thought only the men. Child's future discussed, Singing Bird. Interrupted with a shrug. Mother should hear. She paused, her ancient eyes searching Eleanor's face. Two paths before you now. Both are hard, both with sorrow and joy. The elder's perception was uncanny as always. How do I choose? Eleanor asked softly. Singing Bird placed a gnarled hand over Eleanor's heart. Listen here. Not to white woman thoughts, not to Shawnee woman thoughts, to my mother thoughts. She nodded toward the infant. Children are bridge between worlds. Mother must be guide. The wisdom of these words settled into Eleanor's consciousness as she prepared for the council meeting. Nadie arrived to help her. Dress in clean clothing, a Shawnee dress of soft deerskin that the young woman had altered to accommodate Eleanor's nursing needs. Together they wrapped William in warm furs against the November chill. Brother, speak for you at council, Nadie said as she helped arrange Eleanor's hair. Husband, speak too. Chief, listen to both, then decide. Eleanor nodded, her stomach knotting, with tension. And after the chief decides? Nadie's hands stilled momentarily. If the husband stays for winter, he lives in a men's lodge. You stay here. When snow melts." She left the sentence unfinished, but her meaning was clear. When spring came, Eleanor would be expected to leave with Thomas, to return to the white world, to resume the journey that had been interrupted by fate. The central clearing of the village had been arranged for the council, logs placed in a large circle around a small ceremonial fire, with Chief Grey Wolf's carved wooden seat positioned at the northern point. Warriors and elders were already gathering as Nady led Eleanor to a place slightly outside the main circle, but still within hearing distance. Eleanor caught sight of Thomas standing with two Shawnee guards near the edge of the clearing. He had been given clean clothing, buckskin similar to those worn by the Shawnee men, though without the decorative beadwork that adorned the garments of tribal members. His beard had been trimmed, his hair pulled back with a leather cord. The overall effect was strangely disorienting. Thomas, yet not Thomas. A white man in native dress, caught between identities just as she herself was caught. Between worlds. Their eyes met across the clearing, and Thomas offered a tentative smile. Eleanor nodded in acknowledgement, then continued scanning the gathering until she found who she was truly seeking. Maka stood in quiet conversation with two tribal elders, his posture relaxed yet dignified. Unlike Thomas, he seemed entirely comfortable in his skin, certain of his place in the world. When he glanced her way, his expression revealed nothing, but he inclined his head slightly, a gesture of respect that caused an unexpected ache in Eleanor's chest. Chief Grey Wolf's arrival silenced the assembled tribe. The elderly leader moved, with deliberate grace, to his place at the head of the circle, his ceremonial staff striking the ground 3 times to signal the council's beginning. He spoke in Shawnee first, his deep voice carrying across the hushed clearing. Eleanor could not understand the words, but she recognized when he switched to English, a courtesy, she realized, so that Thomas and she could follow the proceedings. "Spirits bring strange paths," the chief began, his weathered face solemn. "White woman came to us carrying a new life. Maka, honored hunter, spoke for her. Tribe accepted." He gestured toward Thomas. "Now my husband comes, rising from the dead. Seeks. Woman seeks child." He turned to Maka. "Maka, you first found white woman. You speak first." Maka stepped forward into the circle, his bearing proud but not arrogant. "I found Eleanor Pritchard alone," he stated simply. "Wagon people left her to die with an unborn child. This is not honorable." He glanced briefly at Eleanor and William before continuing. "She learned our ways, respected our people, child born strong under Shawnee stars." He paused. "Now my husband returns. This changes the path." "How changes path change?" Grey Wolf prompted. Maka's expression remained carefully neutral. "Woman belongs with husband. Child belongs with father. When the snow melts, they should return to White World." Eleanor felt a jolt of surprise and hurt at his words. After their conversation the previous night, she had thought, what? That he might claim her, request that she stay. The idea was as impossible as it was tantalizing. Grey Wolf nodded thoughtfully, then turned to Thomas. "White man who returned from death ground, you speak now." Thomas stepped forward, visibly nervous but determined. "My name is Thomas Pritchard," he began. "I thank you for sheltering my wife and helping bring my son safely into the world." He cleared his throat. "I've been told how Maka found Eleanor and brought her here when she had nowhere else to go. I owe him, and all of you, a debt I can never repay." Murmurs rippled through the assembled tribe, the translator conveying Thomas's words to those who didn't understand English. "I ask only for shelter until the mountain passes clear," Thomas continued. "Then we will trouble you no further. We'll continue west, as we planned before illness separated us. West. Chief Grey Wolf's eyebrows rose. To take more Indian land? Thomas flushed. We seek only a small parcel in Oregon territory, a place to raise our son in peace. Peace, the chief repeated, the word heavy with irony. White man's peace means Indian suffering, he gestured broadly. Once all this land Shawnee, now only a hidden valley remains. His penetrating gaze fixed on Thomas. What happens when white settlers find this place too? It was a question for which Thomas had no answer, and his discomfort was evident. I cannot speak for all white men, he finally said, only for myself and my family. Grey Wolf studied him for a long moment, then turned unexpectedly toward Eleanor. Woman who birthed child under Shawnee stars, he called. Come forward, bring son. Eleanor's heart hammered against her ribs as she rose carefully, cradling William against her chest. Nadie whispered a quick word of encouragement as Eleanor moved into the council circle, acutely aware of all eyes upon her. You stand between two worlds now, Chief Grey Wolf said, his voice gentler than before. White husband returned, Shawnee people who sheltered you, child born of both paths. He gestured for her to come closer, extending gnarled hands toward the infant. May I see son? Eleanor carefully placed William in the chief's weathered hands. The elder cradled the infant with surprising tenderness, studying his features with ancient wisdom in his eyes. Strong spirit, he pronounced, looking from the child to Eleanor. What name is given? William, Eleanor replied, but he has no Shawnee name. A ripple of interest passed through the assembled tribe. The chief's eyes widened slightly at the implication of her words, that she considered her son connected to both cultures, deserving of names from each. This can be given, Grey Wolf said carefully, returning the baby to Eleanor's arms, if mother wishes. I do, Eleanor confirmed, her voice stronger now. My son was born here, among the Shawnee people who showed more kindness to his mother than her own folk did. I would have him honor both sides of his story. Chief Grey Wolf nodded slowly, then addressed the tribe in Shawnee. Whatever he said caused a stir of reaction, some approving nods, some frowns of concern. When he returned to English, his words were measured. Council decides this. White man remains until spring, lives in a men's lodge. He looked at Eleanor. Women and child stay in Maka's wigwam, as before. He raised a hand to forestall Thomas's objection. Husband may visit during the day, may learn Shawnee ways, if willing. It was a compromise that satisfied no one entirely, yet recognized the complexity of the situation. Thomas's expression tightened, but he nodded his acceptance. Maka's face revealed nothing of his thoughts. When snow melts, the chief continued, white family free to go or stay. His gaze rested meaningfully on Eleanor. Choice will come, for now winter approaches. All must prepare. With that, he struck his staff against the ground 3 times, signaling the council's end. The tribe dispersed gradually, returning to their daily tasks. Thomas approached Eleanor, his expression a mixture of frustration and resignation. This isn't what I hoped for, he admitted quietly. Separated until spring. It's only for sleeping, Eleanor pointed out. We'll have the days together. Thomas glanced toward Maka, who stood at a respectful distance, deliberately not watching their reunion. That hunter, Maka, he seems to have taken quite an interest in your welfare. There was an edge to his voice that Eleanor couldn't ignore. He saved my life, Thomas, and William's. Without him, we both would have died. I understand that, Thomas said, his tone softening as he gazed at his son, and I'm grateful. But things are different now. I'm back. We're a family again. Are we? The question rose unbidden in Eleanor's mind. The Thomas who stood before her was both familiar and strange, physically altered by his ordeal, but changed in deeper ways as well. The confident, sometimes arrogant man who had led her west had been replaced by someone more subdued, more vulnerable, and she herself was no longer the sheltered farmer's daughter who had followed her husband unquestioningly. Months of living among the Shawnee, of learning their ways, of discovering her own strength in the face of abandonment, all had transformed her in ways Thomas couldn't begin to understand. "We need time," she said finally. "All of us. This winter will give us that." Thomas didn't look convinced, but he nodded. "I should go with the men who are to show me the lodge," he said, gesturing toward two warriors who waited nearby. "I'll come by tomorrow to see you and William." "Of course," Eleanor agreed. After one last longing look at his son, Thomas followed the Shawnee men across the clearing toward a large structure that served as communal housing for unmarried warriors and visitors to the tribe. Eleanor found herself alone in the council clearing, with only Maka remaining, his stillness a counterpoint to her inner turmoil. She approached him slowly, William sleeping peacefully in her arms. "Thank you for speaking to the council," she said when the silence between them stretched too thin. Maka inclined his head. "Chief wise," he replied. "Winter gives time. For my husband to heal, for you to choose. You told the council I should return to the white world with Thomas when spring comes," Eleanor noted, unable to keep a hint of question from her voice. Maka's dark eyes met hers directly. "What words did you expect?" "I don't know," Eleanor admitted. Last night I spoke as a man," Maka said quietly. "Today I spoke as a Shawnee warrior. Honor says different things to different parts of spirit." Eleanor considered this, the distinction between personal desire and public duty, between what the heart wanted and what honor demanded. It was a complexity she was only beginning to understand. "The chief mentioned a Shawnee name for William," she said, changing the subject to safer ground. "Is that possible, even though he's not of your blood?" Maka's expression softened as he gazed at the sleeping infant. "Blood not only bond," he said. "Spirit matters more. Child born under Shawnee stars has a claim to the Shawnee name." He hesitated. "If Mother wishes." "I do," Eleanor confirmed. "I want William to know both sides of his heritage, to understand where he comes from, all of it, not just the white world." Something flickered in Maka's eyes, approval perhaps, or deeper emotion quickly masked. "Name ceremony will be held at next full moon," he explained. "Singing bird will prepare. Child receives a spirit name to guide his path." The conversation was interrupted by Nadi's approach. The young woman spoke rapidly to her brother in Shawnee, gesturing toward the eastern edge of the village, where a group of hunters were returning with several deer slung over their shoulders. "I must go," Maka said. "Hunting party returns. Meat must be prepared before snow comes." Eleanor nodded her understanding. As he turned to leave, she called after him. "Maka." He paused, looking back at her. "Thank you," she said simply, "for everything." The corner of his mouth lifted in the ghost of a smile. "Rest well, Eleanor Pritchard." The days that followed established a new rhythm to Eleanor's life in the Shawnee village. Thomas visited each morning after the men's breakfast, eager to spend time with his son and reconnect with his wife. He spoke of their future, the journey west they would resume in spring, the land they would claim in Oregon, the home they would build for William. "It will be everything we dreamed," he assured her repeatedly. "Better, even, now that we've survived. So much." Eleanor would nod and smile, unwilling to dampen his enthusiasm with her own uncertainties. For the truth was, she no longer shared Thomas's clear vision of their future. The past months had revealed new possibilities, new perspectives that made the white settler's path seem both familiar and strangely limiting. In the afternoons, when Thomas returned to help the men prepare for winter, chopping wood, repairing shelters, learning to set traps for the lean months ahead, Eleanor would resume her place among the Shawnee women. Nadie taught her to craft watertight baskets, to tan hides for clothing, to identify healing plants that could be gathered and dried before the first snow. William thrived under the collective care of the tribe. The Shawnee people might have initially viewed his mother with suspicion, but they embraced the infant without reservation, cooing over his increasing alertness, celebrating his strong lungs when he cried, taking turns holding him while Eleanor completed her daily tasks. "Your son has many mothers," Singing Bird observed one day as she watched a young Shawnee woman gently rock William to sleep. "Many fathers too. This Shawnee way. Child belongs to tribe, not just to parents." The concept was foreign to Eleanor's upbringing, where children were the sole responsibility and property of their immediate family. Yet she found herself drawn to this more communal approach to child-rearing, the shared wisdom, the multiple relationships, the sense that William was valued not just as her son or Thomas's heir, but as a person in his own right. Maka maintained a respectful distance during Thomas's daily visits, but would often stop by the wigwam in the evenings. He never entered when Thomas was present, a boundary that Eleanor understood was as much for her husband's comfort as for propriety's sake. Instead, he would bring small gifts for William: a tiny carved wooden animal, a soft rabbit fur blanket, a rattle made from a tortoise shell filled with dried beans. To help him know Shawnee ways, Maka would explain, handing each offering to Eleanor with careful formality. Yet behind the gesture, she sensed a deeper attachment forming, not to replace Thomas as William's father, but to establish his own unique bond with the child born under his protection. Thomas noticed these gifts, of course. "The hunter seems determined to make a Shawnee of our son," he remarked one morning, his tone light but with an undercurrent of concern. "William was born here," Eleanor reminded him gently. "That already makes him different from either of us." Thomas frowned slightly. "He's a Pritchard," he insisted. "My son, your son, an American." "Can he not be all those things?" Eleanor asked. "American and something more? Something that honors the people who sheltered us when our own kind cast us out?" It was an ongoing debate between them, one that revealed the widening gap in their perspectives. Thomas, for all his gratitude toward the Shawnee, still viewed their ways as primitive, their beliefs as superstition, their land as ultimately destined for white settlement. He accepted their hospitality as necessary for survival, but saw no value in incorporating their wisdom into his worldview. Eleanor, by contrast, had begun to question the very foundations of her upbringing: the assumption of white superiority, the drive to conquer and transform the land, the dismissal of native peoples as savages in need of civilization. Living among the Shawnee had revealed a society with its own sophisticated structure, its own profound spiritual beliefs, its own sustainable relationship with the natural world. As the full moon approached and preparations for William's naming ceremony intensified, these differences became increasingly apparent. Thomas initially refused to participate, viewing the ritual as pagan and potentially harmful to his son's Christian soul. "He's already been given a name," he argued. "A good Christian name. What need has he for Shawnee superstitions?" Eleanor stood her ground. "This is important to me, Thomas. The Shawnee took me in when I had nowhere else to go. They helped bring our son safely into the world. Allowing them to honor him with a name from their tradition is the least we can do to show our gratitude." In the end, Thomas relented, though with visible reluctance. The night of the ceremony arrived, clear and cold, with the full moon casting silver light across the frost-covered valley. The entire tribe gathered around a central bonfire, where Chief Grey Wolf presided over the ritual with solemn dignity. Eleanor held William, wrapped warmly against the November chill. Thomas stood stiffly at her side, uncomfortable in the ceremonial setting, but determined to support his wife's wishes. Makar, resplendent in his role as a tribal elder, sat among the council members, his face painted with ceremonial markings that emphasized his strong features. The ceremony began with drumming, hypnotic rhythm that seemed to Eleanor to match the beating of her own heart. Singing Bird stepped forward, taking William from Eleanor's arms and presenting him to the four directions, east, south, west, north, while chanting words in Shawnee that Eleanor now recognized as a blessing for protection and strength. Chief Grey Wolf rose from his place, his ancient voice rising above the drums as he addressed the assembled tribe in their language, then switched to English for the benefit of the child's parents. "This child born between worlds," he intoned, reaching out to place a weathered hand on William's head, "carries the blood of White Father, born under the protection of Shawnee Hunter, has claim to both paths." He looked directly at Eleanor and Thomas. "Name chooses child, not child chooses name. Spirits speak to elders in dreams, reveal a child's true nature." The chief turned to Makar, who stepped forward with quiet dignity. "Makar dreamed of a child's name," Grey Wolf explained. "As a protector, this is his right." Eleanor felt Thomas tense beside her, but was grateful when he remained silent. Makar approached, his expression solemn as he gazed down at William, who stared back with surprising alertness for a newborn. "In dream," Makar said, his deep voice carrying across the hushed gathering, "I see this child grown to man. He stands between fighting warriors, white men on one side, Shawnee on other, but he holds no weapon. Instead, he speaks. Both sides listen." He placed his hand gently on William's chest. "He is Wapanukak, the Dawn Bridge, one who connects darkness to light, one who helps others cross between worlds." A murmur of approval rippled through the tribe as Singing Bird returned William to Eleanor's arms. "Wapanukaktha," she repeated carefully, testing the name on her tongue. "Dawn Bridge." It was perfect, a name that acknowledged her son's unique position between cultures, that envisioned a future where he might help heal the divisions that separated the worlds of his birth and his heritage. Thomas remained silent throughout the remainder of the ceremony, his expression unreadable. Only when they had returned to Makar's wigwam, with William sleeping peacefully in the cradle board that Nadi had crafted for him, did he voice his thoughts. "I allowed this ritual because it matters to you," he said quietly, "but our son is William Pritchard, not whatever that Indian name is. When we leave in spring, we leave these customs behind. We return to our own people, our own ways." Eleanor busied herself adjusting William's blankets, unwilling to meet Thomas's gaze for fear he would read the conflict in her eyes. "The ceremony is done," she said neutrally. "William has been honored by the tribe." Thomas studied her for a long moment. "You've changed, Eleanor," he finally said. "Sometimes I feel I hardly know you anymore." "We've both changed," she replied softly. "How could we not, after everything that's happened?" He reached for her hand, his expression earnest. "But we're still us, still Thomas and Eleanor Pritchard, still the same people who set out from Pennsylvania with dreams of a new life in Oregon. Are we?" Eleanor wondered silently. "Or are we something different now, shaped by separation, by survival, by the unexpected turns that had brought them to this moment?" She had no answer, not yet. But as the first snow of winter began to fall that night, blanketing the Shawnee village in pristine white, Eleanor knew that she had months ahead to search her heart, to decide which path to choose when spring finally arrived. Outside, the wind whispered through the barren trees, carrying the ancient songs of the land. Within the shelter of Maka's wigwam, William, Wapanukak the Dawn Bridge, slept peacefully, unaware of the complex forces that had shaped his entry into the world, or the momentous choices that lay ahead for his mother. Eleanor stroked his downy head, marveling at how something so small could represent such enormous questions. "Sleep well, my little bridge," she murmured. "Your path is just beginning." Winter descended upon the Shawnee Valley with a fierce intensity that Eleanor had never experienced in Pennsylvania. Snow piled deep against the wigwams, transforming the village into a collection of white mounds, connected by narrow, trampled paths. The stream froze solid, forcing the tribe to break through the ice each morning for water. Game grew scarce, and the hunters, Maka among them, ventured farther afield in search of deer or elk to supplement the stored provisions. Inside Maka's wigwam, Eleanor and William remained warm and secure. The structure's design, perfected over generations, retained heat remarkably well when the central fire kept burning. Furs lined the walls and floor, creating a snug cocoon against the bitter cold that howled outside. December passed in a blur of snowstorms and short, grey days. William grew with astonishing speed, his features becoming more defined, his personality emerging in small but distinct ways. He was a serious baby, observant and calm except when hungry or uncomfortable. His eyes, initially the slate blue of all newborns, darkened toward brown. Thomas's eyes, Eleanor noted, with a mixture of nostalgia and melancholy. Thomas visited faithfully each day, trudging through snow from the men's lodge to spend hours cradling his son, speaking to him of the future they would build in Oregon. He brought small gifts when he could: a carved wooden horse, a tiny quilt pieced together from scraps of fabric he had traded for with one of the tribe's hunters. "He'll need proper toys when we reach Oregon," Thomas would say, watching William grasp at the carved horse with clumsy fingers. "I'll build him a rocking horse, a sled, perhaps even a small wagon he can pull." Eleanor would nod and smile, allowing Thomas his dreams without confirming or denying her participation in them. The unspoken question of her decision hung between them, a shadow neither was ready to confront directly. For his part, Thomas seemed determined to prove himself worthy of the second chance fate had granted him. He worked tirelessly alongside the Shawnee men, learning their hunting techniques, helping to clear paths after heavy snowfalls, adopting survival skills that would serve him well on the frontier. Some of the younger warriors began to accept his presence, inviting him to join their evening games of chance or skill. "They're not so different from us," he admitted one evening as he prepared to return to the men's lodge. "Different beliefs, different customs, but underneath, men with families to protect, children to feed, hopes for the future." It was a concession Eleanor had not expected, a small crack in Thomas's previously rigid worldview. She wondered how deep that crack might extend, whether it might eventually create an opening for a different kind of understanding. Maka maintained his distance during Thomas's visits, but continued to stop by in the evenings, often bringing Neddy with him. The four of them would sit around the fire while William slept nearby, sharing the day's events in a mixture of English and Shawnee words. Eleanor's grasp of the native language improved steadily under Neddy's patient tutelage, allowing her to participate more fully in village life. January brought the bitter cold that the elders had predicted, days when breath froze instantly in the air, when even the bravest hunters remained close to the village, when the entire tribe huddled in their wigwams, conserving energy and warmth. During one such period of extreme cold, disaster struck. A young warrior named Swift Fox, ignoring the warnings of the elders, ventured out alone to check his traps. When he failed to return by nightfall, the tribe organized a search party despite the dangerous conditions. Eleanor was helping Singing Bird prepare medicinal herbs when Nadie burst into the wigwam, her face tight with worry. "Brother goes with a search party," she announced breathlessly. "White man Thomas, too. Swift Fox lost in snow." In this cold, Eleanor glanced anxiously toward the wigwam entrance, where ice crystals had formed around the edges of the flap. "It's too dangerous. Men must try," Singing Bird said grimly, her ancient hands continuing to grind dried roots with practiced efficiency. "Young warrior dies without help." The search party returned near dawn, half frozen themselves despite their heavy fur wrappings. They had found Swift Fox collapsed in a snowdrift, barely alive, his feet and hands already showing signs of severe frostbite. As the warriors carried their comrade to Singing Bird's wigwam, Eleanor caught sight of Thomas and Maka supporting each other, their faces raw from exposure, their strength nearly depleted. Without thinking, she hurried toward them, William securely wrapped and carried on her back in the Shawnee fashion. "You're hurt," she exclaimed, noting the haunted look in both men's eyes, the exhaustion that threatened to bring them to their knees. "Got separated from the others," Thomas explained, through chattering teeth. "Lost our way in the blizzard." "Maka find white man," Nadie added, appearing at Eleanor's side with blankets. "Track him through snow when others give up." Eleanor's gaze flew to Maka, who dismissed the praise with a slight shake of his head. "Thomas, find Swift Fox first," he countered. "Without him, young warrior die in snow." It was the first time Eleanor had heard Maka use Thomas's name rather than husband or white man. The significance was not lost on her, nor, judging by his expression, on Thomas himself. "We need to get you both warm," Eleanor insisted, practical concerns overriding her momentary surprise. "Thomas, the men's lodge is too far in your condition. You'll stay in the wigwam tonight." Neither man had the strength to argue. Inside Maka's wigwam, Eleanor and Nadie worked quickly to build up the fire, to prepare hot herbal tea, to help the men remove their frozen outer garments. Eleanor checked their extremities for signs of frostbite, while Nadie arranged sleeping furs at opposite sides of the fire pit. "Swift Fox live?" Maka asked as Eleanor wrapped a warm fur around his shoulders. "Singing Bird is with him now," she replied. "She's seen men survive worse." Maka nodded wearily. "Good. Young warrior has much to learn. Today's lesson is harsh, but important. Rest now," Eleanor urged, pressing a cup of Singing Bird's tea into his hands. "Both of you." As the men gradually warmed and their exhaustion overtook them, Eleanor settled between them with William, who had slept through the entire commotion. She studied the faces of the two men who represented such different paths in her life. Thomas, with his fair skin and beard, now streaked with premature grey, Maka with his copper features and quiet strength. They had worked together to save a life, setting aside the barriers of race and rivalry. In that frozen wilderness, they had found common ground in courage and determination. It was, Eleanor reflected, a small glimpse of what might be possible in a better world, the kind of world her son might one day help create. The blizzard continued for 3 more days, forcing Thomas to remain in Maka's wigwam. The arrangement was awkward at first, Thomas clearly uncomfortable sleeping under the same roof as the man he viewed as a rival, Maka scrupulously maintaining distance and respect despite being in his own dwelling. Yet as the days passed, a cautious camaraderie developed between them. Thomas, genuinely curious about Maka's hunting skills, began asking questions about tracking in snow, about reading weather signs, about constructing emergency shelters. Maka, recognizing Thomas's sincere interest, answered patiently, occasionally, demonstrating techniques with the few materials at hand. Eleanor watched this tentative exchange of knowledge with growing wonder. It was as if the shared experience of the rescue had opened a door between worlds that both men had previously assumed locked. By the time the storm abated and Thomas could return to the men's lodge, Something fundamental had shifted in the dynamics. Between them, the rigid boundaries had softened, not erased, but made permeable. It was, Eleanor thought, like the first hint of spring thaw in a frozen stream, a promise of change to come, of new possibilities emerging from the rigid certainties. Of winter February brought more snow but less bitter cold. William continued to thrive, reaching for objects with increasing coordination, responding to voices with gurgles and coos that delighted everyone who heard them. The entire tribe took pride in his development, elders stopping by to admire his growth, children bringing small treasures to entertain him. "He belongs to the people now," Singing Bird observed one day as they watched a group of Shawnee children make faces to elicit William's smiles. Wapanukak, that carries the tribe's hopes, the dual nature of her son's identity, was becoming increasingly apparent. William Pritchard, son of Thomas, heir to the white settler's dream of land and home. Wapanukak, Dawn Bridge, born under Shawnee stars, celebrated and claimed by the tribe. Two names, two legacies, two possible futures embodied in one small being who as yet had no understanding of the weight he carried. As for Eleanor, her own identity had undergone a transformation no less profound. The naive farmer's daughter from Pennsylvania had disappeared, replaced by a woman who had survived abandonment, childbirth in a strange culture, a winter in the wilderness. She had learned to tan hides, to weave baskets, to identify healing plants, to navigate the complex social structures of the Shawnee tribe. More significantly, she had learned to see the world through different eyes, to recognize the wisdom in Shawnee traditions, the deep connection to the land that guided their decisions, the communal values that ensured no one went hungry while others feasted. These lessons had reshaped her understanding of what constituted civilization, of what might constitute a good life for herself and her son. March arrived with warmer winds and the first tentative birdsong after the long silence of winter. The snow began to recede from south-facing slopes, revealing patches of muddy earth that promised eventual green. The tribe's stores were running low, but hunting parties returned with increasing success as wildlife emerged from winter dormancy. This thaw had begun in more ways than one. One crisp morning, as Eleanor sat outside the wigwam with William, enjoying the strengthening sun, Maka approached with an uncharacteristic hesitancy in his step. "May I speak?" he asked, his formal manner suggesting this was no casual conversation. Eleanor nodded, gesturing for him to join her on the log that served as a bench. "Spring comes," Maka began, his gaze fixed on the distant mountains where snow still capped the highest peaks. "Soon the mountain pass clear. Time for choice comes too." Eleanor had known this moment was approaching, had both dreaded and anticipated the necessity of decision. "Yes," she acknowledged softly, "it does." Maka was silent for a long moment, his profile strong against the blue sky. "I not spoken before," he finally continued. "Honor say husband's return changes path. Honor say I step back." "I understand," Eleanor said, and she did. Maka's restraint these past months had been born not of indifference, but of profound respect for her, for Thomas, for the complexities of their situation. "But now the path fork again," he said, turning to face her directly. "You must choose. For my son, for self." He hesitated, then added quietly, "I speak now not as a Shawnee warrior. Speak as a man." Eleanor's heart quickened, though she had long suspected what he might say. "I'm listening," she encouraged when he fell silent again. Maka's dark eyes met hers with unwavering directness. "I ask you to stay," he said simply, "with tribe, with me." The words hung in the crisp air between them, a declaration that changed everything and nothing. that merely gave voice to what had been building since that first day in the forest when he had found her alone and desperate. "And William?" Eleanor asked, needing to understand the full scope of what he offered. "Wapanukirk, the already Shawnee in heart," Maka replied. "I raise as own son, teach ways of hunt, of honor, help him be a bridge between worlds." And Thomas. This was the crux of it. The husband who had returned from the dead, who had survived against impossible odds to reclaim his family. Pain flickers briefly across Maka's stoic features. "Husband has to claim first," he acknowledged. "If you choose him, I understand. This is also a path of honor," he paused. "But the choice must be yours. Not duties, not traditions. Heart's choice." Eleanor gazed down at William, who stared back at her with Thomas's eyes set in a face that already showed hints of the man he would become. What future could she offer him in the white world? A homestead carved from wilderness, a life of hard work and material progress, surrounded by a society that valued land ownership and individual achievement. And if they remained with the Shawnee, a different kind of education, in tribal wisdom, in living harmoniously with the land, in valuing community above personal gain, but also a life on the margins, always at risk from the relentless westward expansion of white settlement, always caught between worlds that viewed each other with suspicion and hostility. No easy choice, no clear path, only possibilities waited, with consequences she could glimpse but not fully predict. "I need time," she finally said, "to think, to be certain." Maka nodded, accepting her response with characteristic dignity. "Moon reaches full again in 7 days," he said. "Chief plans council then. To hear the choice, to prepare for the spring journey if you go." He rose to his feet in a single fluid motion. "Until then, I wait." As he walked away, Eleanor felt the weight of decision pressing upon her with new urgency. 7 days to determine the course of 3 lives. 7 days to choose between worlds, between men, between futures that diverged like streams from a common source, never to rejoin. That evening, when Thomas made his customary visit, Eleanor knew she must speak with equal honesty to him. They sat outside the wigwam, William sleeping peacefully in the cradle board that Nadi had crafted for him, the lengthening shadows of afternoon stretching across the clearing. "The pass will open soon," Thomas remarked, gazing toward the mountains, with anticipation. "Another month, perhaps less, if this warm weather holds." "Thomas," Eleanor began carefully, "we need to talk about what happens then." Something in her tone must have alerted him to the seriousness of the conversation. He turned to face her fully, his expression wary. "About our journey west? I've been thinking we should head for Fort Laramie first. Restock supplies, perhaps. Join another wagon train for safety. Not about the route," Eleanor clarified gently, "about whether I'm going." Thomas stared at her, incomprehension slowly giving way to dawning realization. "What do you mean?" he asked, though his tone suggested he already understood. "I'm not certain that returning to the white world is the right choice," Eleanor explained, her voice steady despite the turmoil within. "For me, for William." Thomas's face hardened, a muscle twitching in his jaw. "This is about him, isn't it, that Shawnee hunter, Maka?" "It's about many things," Eleanor countered. "Yes, Maka is part of it. He saved my life when our own people abandoned me. He's shown me a different way of living, of seeing the world. And I suppose he's asked you to stay," Thomas said bitterly, "to become his woman, to give my son to the savages." Eleanor flinched at the word, but kept her voice calm. "The Shawnee are not savages, Thomas. Living among them has taught me that. And yes, Maka has asked me to stay, but as a choice freely made, not as an obligation or duty." Thomas rose to his feet, agitation driving him to pace before the wigwam. "I cannot believe this," he muttered. "My wife, considering abandoning her husband for an Indian. I haven't decided anything yet, Eleanor reminded him. I'm trying to be honest with you about the choice I face. Thomas stopped pacing, visibly struggling to control his emotions. What about our vows, Eleanor? Until death do us part. I didn't die, though it was a near thing. I fought my way back to you against impossible odds because I believed in those vows in our life together. His words struck home, piercing the careful armor Eleanor had constructed around her heart. Thomas was right. Their marriage vows remained intact, binding them together in the eyes of God and society. She had mourned him, had begun to build a new life without him, but he had returned. Did that not obligate her to honor their commitment? Yet, against those vows stood her lived experience of the past months, the community that had embraced her despite initial suspicion, the wisdom she had gained from Singing Bird and the other Shawnee women, the quiet strength and honor she had come to admire in Maka. Could she simply set aside those connections, that growth, to return to a world that had cast her out when she most needed help? I need time, she told Thomas, echoing her words to Maka. This isn't a decision I can make lightly. It affects all of us, you, me, William most of all. Thomas's expression softened slightly. I understand it's been a difficult time, he conceded, that you've been through experiences I can't fully comprehend. But Eleanor, we built a life together once. We can do it again. He reached for her hand. Give us that chance. Eleanor allowed his fingers to close around hers, feeling the familiar calluses, the strength that had once been her entire security. The chief has called a council for the full moon, she said quietly. 7 days from now, I'll give my answer then. The week that followed was the most difficult of Eleanor's life. She moved through her daily tasks as if in a dream, caring for William, participating in tribal activities, speaking with Thomas during his visits. But her mind never ceased its relentless circling around the choice before her. She sought wisdom from Singing Bird, whose ancient eyes seemed to see beyond the immediate dilemma to deeper currents. Heart knows path, the elder advised cryptically. Fear makes ears deaf to heart's voice. Nadie was more direct. Brother would die for you, she stated plainly, as they worked together to repair winter damage to the wigwam. For child too, but once life, not death, once joy, not duty. Even Chief Grey Wolf offered counsel, summoning Eleanor to his wigwam one afternoon. 2 good men, he observed after listening to her dilemma. 2 good paths. No wrong choice, only a different journey. But in the end, Eleanor knew the decision must be hers alone. On the night before the council, she slipped outside after William had fallen asleep, seeking solitude under the nearly full moon that bathed the valley in silver light. She walked to the edge of the clearing where the forest began, feeling the first tentative growth of spring beneath her moccasins. There, between the Shawnee village and the wilderness beyond, Eleanor finally allowed herself to listen to her heart's true voice. Not the voice of duty or obligation, not the voice of gratitude or practicality, but the quiet certainty that had been growing within her since that first day when Maka had found her alone and desperate by the abandoned wagon trail. The morning of the council dawned clear and mild, the air filled with the promise of spring. Eleanor dressed with care in the deerskin dress Nadie had made for her, wrapping William in his finest blanket, the one adorned with Shawnee beadwork that told the story of his birth beneath tribal stars. The entire village gathered in the central clearing, forming the familiar circle around the council fire. Chief Grey Wolf took his place at the northern point, his ceremonial staff striking the ground 3 times to signal the beginning of deliberations. "We gather to hear the woman's choice," he announced, gesturing for Eleanor to step forward into the circle. "Path forks with spring thaw. Woman with a child born under Shawnee stars must choose, return to White World with husband or remain with Shawnee people. Eleanor moved to the center of the circle, William cradled against her chest. She was acutely aware of Thomas standing rigidly to one side, of Maka's still presence opposite him, of the entire tribe watching with solemn interest. This was no private decision, but one that affected the community that had sheltered her, the men who loved her, the child who connected them all. "I have thought deeply about this choice," she began, her voice clear in the hushed clearing. "I have weighed duty against desire, past against future, one world against another." She turned first to Thomas, meeting his anxious gaze directly. "Thomas Pritchard, you were my first love. We shared dreams of land in Oregon, of a home built with our own hands. When I thought you were dead, I grieved deeply. Your return was a miracle I never expected." Thomas's expression lightened with hope, and Eleanor felt the weight of what she must say next. "But the woman who married you in Pennsylvania no longer exists. The months alone, the abandonment by our own people, the shelter I found here, all have changed me in ways I'm only beginning to understand." The hope in Thomas's eyes dimmed, replaced by a dawning recognition of what was to come. Eleanor turned to Maka, whose face revealed nothing of his thoughts. "Maka, you found me at my most vulnerable. You offered protection without demand, shelter without condition. You introduced me to your people's ways, with patience and respect. In doing so, you showed me a different way of living, of seeing the world." She paused, gathering courage for the final declaration. "I have decided to remain with the Shawnee people, to raise my son, William Wapanukake the Pritchard, in the wisdom of both worlds, but rooted in this valley, in this community that accepted us when we had nowhere else to go." A murmur rippled through the assembled tribe. Surprise, approval, concern all mingled in the sound. Thomas stepped forward, his face pale with shock. "Eleanor, you can't mean this," he protested. "He's my son. You're my wife." "I'm sorry, Thomas," Eleanor said gently. "I know this isn't what you fought to return to, but it's the truth of my heart. William will know you. I would never prevent that. But our path together has ended." Thomas stared at her for a long moment, grief and anger warring in his expression. Then, without another word, he turned and strode from the circle, disappearing between the wigwams toward the men's lodge. Chief Grey Wolf raised his staff, reclaiming the council's attention. "Woman has chosen," he announced. "Tribe accepts choice, accepts a child as Shawnee." He turned to Maka. "Hunter who found a woman in the forest, you speak now." Maka stepped forward, his bearing proud yet humble. "I honor a woman's choice," he said simply. "Will protect her and child with my life. Will teach boy ways of both worlds, so he may truly be Dawn Bridge." He turned to Eleanor, extending his hand. "If a woman accepts, I ask her to become my wife when the proper time passes." Eleanor placed her hand in his, feeling the strength and certainty of his grip. "I accept," she replied, "when the proper time has passed." With that, the council concluded. The tribe dispersed to their daily tasks, though many stopped to offer words of welcome or blessing to Eleanor and William. Nadie approached with tears of joy in her eyes, embracing her future sister with uncharacteristic demonstrativeness. Only Singing Bird remained apart, watching the proceedings with ancient wisdom in her gaze. When Eleanor approached her later, the elder nodded in satisfaction. "Heart spoke," she said simply. "You listened." "Was it the right choice?" Eleanor asked, suddenly uncertain in the aftermath of the decision. Singing Bird's weathered face creased in a rare smile. "No right, no wrong, only path that is yours." She touched William's cheek gently. "Child will build bridge between worlds. Mother first must show the way." That evening, as Eleanor prepared William for sleep in what was now truly their home, she heard a soft footfall outside the wigwam. Thomas stood at the entrance, his face haggard but composed, a small bundle in his hands. "May I come in?" he asked formally. Eleanor nodded, gesturing him inside. He knelt beside the cradle board where William lay awake, staring up with curious eyes at the father he would barely know. "I'm leaving at first light," Thomas announced without preamble. "A hunting party goes to the eastern ridge tomorrow. I'll continue on from there back to the settlements." So soon? Eleanor had expected anger, recrimination, perhaps even an attempt to change her mind. This quiet acceptance was unexpected. Thomas shrugged slightly. "There's nothing for me here now." He gazed down at William, gently touching the infant's cheek. "Except this little man, and he'll be well cared for, I can see that." "You'll always be his father, Thomas," Eleanor said softly. "I won't let him forget that." Thomas nodded, then held out the bundle he had brought. "For him," he explained as Eleanor unwrapped it to reveal a small wooden box, cunningly carved with images of deer and trees. "I made it during the winter. Thought it would hold his little treasures someday." The gift was beautiful. Evidence of Thomas's skill and care, of the father he might have been in another life, another world. "Thank you," Eleanor whispered, genuinely moved by the gesture. "It's perfect." Thomas rose to his feet, his expression resolute. "I won't say I understand." "Your choice," he admitted. "Perhaps I never will. But I've seen enough of the Shawnee these past months to know they're not what I once believed. My son could have worse teachers in courage and honor." It was as close to a blessing as Eleanor could have hoped for. An acknowledgement, however, grudging, that the path she had chosen held its own kind of integrity. "Be well, Eleanor Pritchard," Thomas said as he turned to leave. "Perhaps one day when he's older, you might bring our son east. Let him see the other half of his heritage." "Perhaps," Eleanor agreed, though they both knew the likelihood was small. The worlds they had chosen diverged too sharply, the gap between them widening with each passing year of white expansion and native displacement. After Thomas had gone, Eleanor stood in the doorway of the wigwam, watching the moon rise full and bright over the valley that had become her home. In the distance, she could see Maka returning from the evening hunt, his silhouette unmistakable against the darkening sky. William stirred in his cradle, a small sound that drew her attention back to the present moment, to the life she had chosen and the future that stretched before them. Uncertain, complex, but authentically their own. "Look, little bridge," she whispered, lifting him to see the moon. "A new world is beginning." The days following Eleanor's decision at the council brought swift changes to the Shawnee village. Thomas departed with the dawn hunting party as promised, a solitary figure moving eastward with only the barest necessities and the memories of what might have been. He did not say goodbye to Eleanor again, but left a small carved wooden horse for William, a final gift from a father to the son he would likely never know. Spring advanced rapidly across the valley, erasing winter's harshness with vibrant green shoots and the return of birdsong. The tribe emerged from their winter isolation, eager to hunt fresh game, to gather early plants, to feel the sun's strengthening warmth against their faces. As the traditional mourning period for Eleanor's former marriage passed, preparations began for a new ceremony, her union with Maka according to Shawnee customs. Unlike the Christian wedding she had shared with Thomas in a Pennsylvania church, this ritual emphasized not the ownership of one person by another, but the joining of two paths into a shared journey. "Marriage is different for Shawnee," Nady explained as she helped Eleanor prepare a special dress adorned with intricate beadwork. "Not just man and woman. Families join, responsibilities shared." The ceremony took place as the first wildflowers bloomed across the valley floor. The entire tribe gathered to witness the union, forming a circle around Maka and Eleanor as Chief Grey Wolf conducted the ancient rituals. William, now nearly 5 months old and increasingly alert to the world around him, watched from singing. Bird's arms, his dark eyes taking in the colourful spectacle. "Two streams joined to make a river," the chief intoned, binding Eleanor and Maka's hands with a woven cord decorated with eagle feathers. "Two paths become one, strong together, flowing toward the same horizon." Eleanor felt a profound peace settle over her as she spoke the promised words, accepting Maka as her husband, her protector, her companion on life's journey. This was no desperate choice made in the shadow of abandonment, but a deliberate embrace of the future she desired, not just for herself, but for her son. Maka's customary reserve softened as he gazed at Eleanor, his dark eyes reflecting emotions usually kept carefully controlled. "My heart finds home," he said simply, the Shawnee words now familiar to Eleanor's ears. That night, as celebration fires burned throughout the village and the tribe feasted on freshly hunted venison, Eleanor watched Maka cradling William with natural ease. The infant reached up to grab at his new father's long hair, eliciting a rare, full-throated laugh from the usually stoic hunter. "He grows strong," Maka observed, pride evident in his voice. "Will be a great warrior someday, or perhaps a great peacemaker, dawn bridge between worlds." "Perhaps both," Eleanor suggested, leaning against Maka's shoulder with a contentment she had never expected to find in this remote valley so far from the life she had once known. Summer unfolded with vibrant intensity across the Shawnee lands. Eleanor, now fully accepted as a member of the tribe, contributed her growing skills to the community's welfare, harvesting wild plants under singing birds' guidance, learning to craft increasingly complex baskets from nadi, even joining the women who prepared hides for the winter garments that would eventually be needed. William thrived under the collective care of the tribe, his personality emerging more distinctly with each passing week. He had Thomas's thoughtful gaze, but Maka's quiet watchfulness, observing the world around him with an intensity that sometimes startled Eleanor. He was neither fully white nor Shawnee, but something new, a bridge indeed between worlds that too rarely found common ground. One tranquil evening, as summer began its gradual surrender to autumn, Eleanor sat outside their wigwam watching William attempt to crawl, while Maka fashioned a tiny bow that would one day become the child's first hunting weapon. "Rider comes," Maka said suddenly, his keen senses detecting movement long before Eleanor could discern anything unusual. The village watchman had already spotted the approaching figure, a lone horseman making his way up the hidden valley trail that few outsiders knew existed. Warriors moved into defensive positions, while women gathered children close, the peaceful scene transforming in moments to wary readiness. As the rider drew nearer, Eleanor felt a jolt of recognition. "It's Josiah Miller," she exclaimed, identifying the kind-hearted man who had defended her against Silas Blackwell's decision to abandon her all those months ago. Maka nodded, his expression guarded as he rose to his feet. "Stay here with the child," he instructed, moving to join the warriors who intercepted the visitor at the village perimeter. Eleanor watched anxiously as Josiah dismounted, raising his hands in the universal gesture of peace. He spoke earnestly to the Shawnee men, occasionally gesturing in what seemed to be her direction. After a brief consultation, Chief Grey Wolf summoned Eleanor to join them. "This man asks for you," the chief explained. "He bring news, important for you to hear." Josiah's weathered face broke into a relieved smile when he saw Eleanor approaching with William in her arms. "Mrs. Pritchard, thank the Lord you're alive and well, and the baby too. He's a fine-looking boy." "Mr. Miller," Eleanor acknowledged, surprised by how strange it felt to hear her former name. "How did you find us? Why have you come?" "Thomas Pritchard found our settlement 2 months back," Josiah explained. "Told us you were living among the Shawnee. Most folks didn't believe him. thought grief had addled his mind. He glanced around at the village, taking in the neat wigwams, the organized activity, the evident prosperity of the tribe. But I believed. Remember how they cast you out. Figured I owed you the truth, at least. Truth about what? Eleanor asked. Sensing something ominous in the man's demeanor, Josiah removed his hat, twisting it nervously in his hands. Settlers coming, he said bluntly. Governments granted land rights all through this territory. Survey. Ye parties already mapping the valley approaches. By next spring they'll be here. Families, livestock, plows to turn the earth. The news struck like a physical blow. Eleanor glanced at Maka, whose face had hardened into an expressionless mask, that nonetheless couldn't conceal the pain in his eyes. Chief Grey Wolf seemed to age before her, his shoulders slumping under the weight of yet another displacement. How long? The chief asked simply. A year. Maybe less, Josiah replied, genuine regret in his voice. I'm sorry. I thought you should have warning at least, time to decide where to go. Eleanor felt a cold certainty settle in her stomach. This was the relentless tide that had pushed the Shawnee from their ancestral lands, forcing them into ever smaller territories, eroding their traditional way of life with each new treaty, each new broken promise. That night, after Josiah had departed with supplies and the tribe's grudging thanks for his warning, the council gathered to discuss their future. Eleanor sat beside Maka as an equal, her status as his wife granting her voice in tribal decisions. We move west, one elder suggested, beyond mountains, find new valleys. West fills with white settlers too, another countered. No place left to hide. We fight, a young warrior urged, his face flushed with anger. This is our last valley. We stand here. The debate continued into the night, voices rising and falling like the waxing and waning moon. Through it all, Eleanor held William close, acutely aware that his future hung in the balance of these deliberations. Finally, Maka rose to speak, his deep voice cutting through the arguments with calm authority. Fighting brings death, he stated. Moving brings hardship. Neither path is good. He paused, surveying the assembled tribe. But perhaps a third path exists. All eyes turned to him as he continued. My wife knows white ways, speaks their language, understand their thinking. He gestured toward Eleanor and William. My son bridges both worlds. Perhaps we will not fight. Perhaps we will not run. Perhaps we learn to live alongside, keep our ways while understanding theirs. His proposal was met with skepticism, even outrage from some quarters. Yet as the discussion evolved, a tentative consensus began to form around a radical idea, not to retreat from the coming settlers, but to engage with them from a position of knowledge and preparation, to use the year of grace, to learn the white man's laws, to secure formal recognition of at least part of their valley, to find a way to preserve what mattered most of their traditions, while adapting to a world that would not stop changing. As dawn broke over the eastern ridge, Chief Grey Wolf delivered his judgment. We will stay, he announced. We prepare. We learn white man's papers, white man's laws. Use them to protect what remains. He turned to Eleanor, his ancient eyes filled with weary wisdom. You teach us, you are a bridge, like your son will be. At that moment, Eleanor understood the full meaning of the choice she had made months earlier, not simply to choose between two men or between two cultures, but to commit herself to something more difficult and more important, the creation of a space where different worlds might learn to coexist. As she stood with Maka at the edge of the village that morning, watching the sun illuminate the valley that had become her home, William stirred against her chest, his small hand reaching out as if to grab the light itself. Dawn Bridge, Maka murmured, touching his son's head gently. Your path, harder than Most, but perhaps most important of all, Eleanor leaned into her husband's strength, facing the uncertain future with clear eyes and an open heart. The path ahead would not be easy, for her, for Marka, for the tribe, or for the child who embodied both worlds. But it was a path worth walking, a bridge worth building in a land too often divided by fear and misunderstanding. Together, she whispered, as William's fingers curled trustingly around her own. Whatever comes, we face it together. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.